Chapter 72, Instauration. Instauration, instaui with macron shn, renewal, restoration, renovation, repair, an act of instituting something, establishment. From Latin instauratio, n, from instaura, renew, from an in, toward, plus store, a stem also found in restra, restore. I think Kurama nii is in trouble, Gaara whispers. Naruto blinks, pulling his gaze away from where F and Yujido are arguing in low voices to look at his friend instead. Gaara's expression is torn, and there's an inattention in his eyes that means Shukaku is talking to him. Shukaku thinks so, he asks, quietly enough to keep either of the girls from noticing. Karen doesn't either, she's next to the girl with her hair up in buns on the other side of the training hall, their heads bent together. A boy with a long braid of black hair is bouncing with nervous energy next to them, trying to interject, and that's distracting Karen enough that she doesn't even look their way. Curling his fingers through Naruto's, Gaara nods solemnly. He didn't want to tell me, but he keeps talking to the others and I can kind of hear it. Naruto bites his lip, because not wanting to tell probably means it's something really bad, like why the Hokage never wanted to tell him what made all the civilians angry at him. And if Kurama, who's strong and smart and brave and good, is the one in trouble, that has to make it really big trouble. Especially with how worried F and Yujido look. Do you think he's going to be okay? Sasuke asks quietly, looking from Gaara to Naruto and back again. Kurama nii is really tough. Naruto says, more cheerfully than he feels. He'll definitely be okay. Besides, he promised he'd always come back, so he has to. He isn't going to think about how many people break their promises, or have in the past. Kurama isn't like that. He wouldn't do that. Your big brother, a quiet voice asks, and Naruto turns quickly to find Sakura a few steps behind him. She looks worried, the way she has since F burst into their classroom and told them to hurry up and get to the practice hall, but she still offers them a slightly shy smile when they all look at her. Kurama nii is the best. Naruto agrees. And that's enough to make him decide, because he and Gaara have saved Kurama before, and if they stay here, they won't know if they need to. He jumps to his feet, tugging on Gaara's hand, and says, "We have to find him, Gaara." Sure. Sasuke wants, but is standing, too, following Gaara up without hesitation, even as he casts a look at F and Yujido. We are not supposed to leave. Fne and Yujido are in front of the doors, Gaara adds, logically, though he's more stating a fact than arguing. Naruto gives Sasuke a stubborn look. Kurama nii is in trouble, he repeats. Me and Gaara can help him. When Gaara nods in solemn agreement, he grins triumphantly. You can stay here, but we need to find Kurama nii. With a roll of his eyes, Sasuke grabs Naruto's other hand. I'm not staying behind, he says, almost a challenge, and flashes faintly when Naruto banes at him. How do you know he's in trouble? Sakura asks, taking a step closer to their huddle. She looks over at where the teachers are talking in low, concerned voices, then back, and hesitates before adding, the teachers didn't say anything. I would have seen. Gaara goes tense, like he always does when other people talk about the Bisha, and Naruto stops what he was about to say, meeting his eyes. For a moment, Gaara seems to shrink in on himself, like he's about to curl into a ball, but he takes a breath and nods, just once. Taking that as permission, Naruto turns back to Sakura with a smile. Because we've got big creatures living inside of us, he says proudly, ignoring Sasuke's muttered inside. Gaara and me have won, and Fne, and Yujido and Yudakada, and Rishi, and Han. Even Yugura has won. They can talk to each other, too. Gaara can hear Shikaka, cause is really strong. Gaara flushes, ducking his head down again, but this time it's not unhappy, so Naruto doesn't mind. He just smiles at Sakura, even though he halfway expects her to flinch back the way the civilians do. Thankfully, Sakura doesn't. She pauses to consider, but nothing else, simply nodding and taking the declaration at face value. Does your brother have one too? Kurama nii is my uncle, Naruto says, in the name of accuracy. With a glance at him, Gaara looks up enough to meet Sakura's gaze. Rishi and Hen are with Kurama nii, but they stop talking to Shikaka, he says quietly, and tugs on Naruto's hand. We should go. Which just leaves them the problem of getting out. Yujido and F haven't moved, and that's the only door. There's no way to get to the high windows without being noticed, and... "We're not going to be able to sneak out," is Sasuke's verdict. "There's a door to the outside in the basement," Sakura says, like she's surprised they don't know. "The teachers put all the extra practice weapons down there." When they all stare at her, she flashes. "I helped Haruka-sensei carry some shuriken down there the other day." "You're the best, Sakura-chan." Naruto cheers. Quietly, though, Karen just looked their way before her two new friends reclaimed her attention. "Can you show us?" "Should you really sneak out?" she asked worriedly. "Moto-sensei said we should stay in here until the Hokage says we can leave." "Kurama and I is more important," Gaara says, just beating Naruto to the words. His voice is firm and steady, without a hint of waver, and his hand is tied around Naruto's. "He saved us. We can save him too, if we all work together. Just like when we beat the geezer." Naruto agrees. "And this time we'll have Sasuke too. And me." When Naruto blinks at her, startled, Sakura curls her hands into the hem of her blue shirt, but doesn't look away. You need me to show you the way, don't you? And if someone catches me sneaking back in, they'll know you're gone. And I want to help." The last part is much quieter, almost tentative, and Sakura's expression says she's braced for them to yell at her, to taunt her. Naruto has heard what the other children say about her sometimes, the way they mock her forehead and her shyness. Less now that Ino is her friend, but it hurts because it's so familiar. It'll be dangerous, he warns, because if Kurama is in trouble, if it's something even he can't handle, that's not a good sign. Sakura doesn't waver. "Ino's really good with kunai and she's been teaching me. If it was my brother or my mom, I'd want to help them, so let me help right now." It's Sasuke who makes a quiet sound of approval, nodding. "Me too," he says, and offers Sakura his free hand. Sakura beams at all three of them and takes his hand in her own. He wakes to bone-deep cold and darkness, made darker still by the fabric pressing down across his eyes. Blindfold, he thinks, with a surge of panic that's deeply ingrained, and jerks forward. But the bonds he expects out there. With a cry, he goes spilling off what feels like a hard platform, tangled in more cloth, and even shinobi reflexes don't give him time to land in any sort of dignified way. He crashes to the cold floor in a heap and groans quietly at the impact, but doesn't waste time as he claws his way free of the white sheet, loose and delicate, that comes away easily in his hands. Yahiko blinks at it, then down at himself. He remembers Ayami and Hans and betrayal in the rain. The last thing he can call to mind is Nagato's face, full of horror, and the tears on his cheeks, the way Conan screamed as the pain in his chest swallowed everything. It's a stark, disconcerting contrast to this darkened room that smells sterile and is both empty and silent. He expects to see his bloody Akatsuki robe, but instead there's a white kimono, perfectly neat and unmarked. A kimono that's been folded right over left because Yahiko was dead. He knows it without hesitation or doubt. That's true. He died, killed himself on Nagato's kunai to save his two best friends, and it was a stupid move, a desperate move, but there were strange shinobi ringing the valley and hands in front of them, and Yahiko hadn't been able to think. So he'd given in, done what Hans had wanted, and broken Nagato and Conan's hearts in the process. But Hans hadn't realized. Hadn't known. Yahiko might have been Akatsuki's leader, but Nagato was its hope. Conan was its drive. Take him out of the picture, and the two of them would forge ahead twice as fast without him. Too fast. Always, always too fast, too reckless, the pair of them. Set to give Yahiko white hairs before he hit 30, without a doubt. Gods, but even if it feels like it's only been a handful of minutes since he died, he's missed them. Of course, that doesn't mean that whatever they did to bring him back wasn't monumentally stupid, because Yahiko has no doubts that it absolutely was. Fighting his way free of the sheet that was apparently covering his formerly dead body, and wow, hello, creepy, Yahiko pushes himself upright, feeling his head spin fatally, and catches himself on the edge of the metal table he was lying on before. He's not a sensor or anything close to it, but there's a shiver of anxiety running down his spine, a flicker of adrenaline and urgency pushing him on, like something crucial he used to know and has mostly forgotten. He needs to go, to move, to find Nagato and Conan no matter where they are, because there's no one else who could be responsible for this. It has to have been the Rinnegan, one of those powers even Jiraiya knew nothing about and could only say would change the world. Resurrection of the dead. Yeah, Yahiko thinks they can safely call that world-changing. The one high window in the wall lets in enough light for him to find the door, and it opens easily, no need to lock in a corpse, after all. Outside is, well, Konoha, Yahiko guesses, from the stories Jiraiya used to tell them. Not that he's ever been to the village before, but the stylized leaf on the hatayade of the shinobi gaping at him is all too familiar. Huh? Yahiko tries. The violet-haired girl closes her mouth, narrows her eyes, and demands, "Who the hell are you?" At the same instant, there's a deafening explosion of chakra, a wave of force that shakes the village and nearly knocks Yahiko from his feet. Blue-white and cold, with all the power of a tsunami, it curls around them in an eddying tide and then retreats to more manageable levels. Yahiko catches himself on a tree growing out of the side of the closest building and turns to look for the source. A surge of paper whirls up above the tops of the buildings, then crashes down. Oh gods. Sorry. Yahiko blurts and takes a running leap before he even thinks to wonder if he can still use chakra. It sparks, though, catches easily, and he bounces from a balcony railing up to the roof, then across to the next building. There's no time to stop, no room to think where Conan and Nagado would be attacking Konoha, no time to grab a weapon in case he needs to defend them. Only action and reaction, the surge of adrenaline that carries him across 2 streets and through a tightly spaced jungle of trees and vines, and really, who has a jungle on top of their house? Konoha is ridiculous, and then out into the open air. Shit is his first thought when he lays eyes on the fight, a split second taken to wonder if he's miscalculated and Conan and Nagado aren't the ones attacking because there's a bijou in the street. He's never seen one in person before, but there's nothing else it can be. How many giant 3-tailed turtles with ridiculous amounts of chakra does the average person come across? But then the image of it flickers and fades out, and an ash-blonde child is left behind, whirling a hook-ended staff around in a sweep of water to block a burst of paper bombs. Jiraiya is a few paces away, bristling with spiny armor as he knocks away one of Conan's clowns, and there's a woman with hair even redder than Nagado's harrying what's probably the actual Conan. One more look around is enough to spot Nagado, slumped over against the side of the building, ghostly pale in a way that means he's still recovering from whatever ridiculous thing he just did, with his legs sprawled out awkwardly in front of him. An identical image of the red-haired woman is closing in. There's no need to think. Even if Nagado and Conan are attacking Konoha, they're Yahiko's best friends, and he'd do anything to save them. He doesn't pause, just throws himself down to the street and brings his hands up into a familiar sign, a burst of water exploding from his mouth like a dragon. There's a loud yelp and then a sheet of stone leaps up to shield her, but Yahiko doesn't wait. He lunges forward, calling up more water to shape into a pair of coins, and they split, lunging around opposite sides of the barrier. Yahiko himself goes over the top, twists around a golden chain that stabs through both coins, and lands heavily, one arm coming up to block the woman's kick. What the hell? The woman hisses, violet eyes bright with fury as she brings her sword around. I sealed you, you know. Sorry. Yahiko offers, then ducks her chains, goes low, and tries to sweep her legs out from under her. Instead, she kicks him in the face, flips over his shoulder, and slams a whip-fast lash of water into his back, throwing him face-first into her Doden war. Yahiko. Conan shouts over the sound of his groan, and in a whirl of origami weapons Conan drops into the fight, another clone splitting off and lunging for the other kunaichi. The redhead spits a curse and dodges, but the clone drives her back, blocking each attempted hit with a sweep of paper weapons. Conan. Yahiko manages, still faintly dazed. He blinks up at her as she pulls him up, and wonders if it's the concussion that makes it look like layers of paper are splitting off from her skin. Did you turn yourself into paper? For a moment Conan doesn't look like she knows whether to laugh or cry. In the end she does neither, but hauls him back to his feet and drags him around the edge of the rock wall, heading for Nagado at a run. He's struggling to get up, but his legs keep folding under him like he's lost all the muscle in them and is painfully, horrifyingly thin. Yahiko. Nagado cries as soon as he catches sight of them, and there's no surprise in his face, just relief and bottomless joy. He reaches out and Ayami, betrayal, knowing that his choice was going to destroy his friends, but hoping that if he could at least buy them time they could get out of the ambush alive and whole and keep living. Yahiko hooks an arm around Conan's waist and drags her with him as he drops to his knees, reaching out with his free arm to catch Nagado by the elbow. A light tug has Nagata spilling forward, colliding with his chest, and Yahiko wraps his arms around both of his best friends and hugs them with all of his strength. "You're alive," he breathes, and it shakes with wonder. Conan laughs, rough and almost wild, and she's clinging to him so tightly it's hard to fill his lungs. We could say the same. Nagata doesn't speak, but he buries his face in Yahiko's chest, hands white-knuckled where they grip his kimono, and his shoulders tremble like he's fighting off sobs. Yahiko coves his hand around the back of Nagata's skull, holding him gently, and kisses the top of Conan's head. "What are you even doing here?" he asks, bewildered. "Why are you fighting Jirai-sensei?" Nagata tenses in his hold, sudden and almost violent, while Conan stills. They don't look at each other, but they don't need to. Yahiko knows guilt on them when he sees it, and something in his chest feels like it's sinking down into his stomach. "Conan," he asks. "Nagata." There's another flood of overwhelming ocean-vast chakra, filling the street with blue-white light, and then the heavy clack of familiar jitter across Stein. "Nagata," Jiraiya says, tone flat in a way that sends a shiver down Yahiko's spine. "Stop this. Let him go. Haven't you dragged that body around enough already, ruined Yahiko's memory, making him do your dirty work?" "What?" In his grip, Nagata makes a small, desperate sound, and chakra sparks, the preparation for something vast. But he's still pale with exhaustion, and before he can start the jutsu, Yahiko drags his fingers through his hair, one soothing pass, and loosens his hold. He pushes to his feet, and both Nagata and Conan let him go, don't try to stop him as he turns to face their old teacher. He can hear them moving behind him, Conan pulling Nagata to his feet and holding him up, but he doesn't glance back, just meets Jiraiya's dark eye squarely. "Jirai-sensei," he says, and doesn't try to make it light-hearted the way he normally would. "You got old." Shock flashes across Jiraiya's face, closely followed by disbelief. "Yahiko," he demands, flicking a glance back towards Nagata. "You're how?" Yahiko just shrugs, because beyond the Rinnegan, probably he doesn't have all that much of an idea. "It's not really important, anyway. He's here, he's alive, all that's left is to move forward." "Why are you attacking us?" he counters. "What were your students?" With a contained snarl, the red-headed woman makes like she's going to launch herself at him, only to have Jiraiya stop her with a tight hand on her shoulder. "Attacking you? They're the ones who invaded the village, you know. Akatsuki are the ones who are trying to take over the world." It feels like someone wrenched the ground. Yahiko is standing on sideways, like the world has abruptly been appended around him. "What?" he asks numbly, and turns to look at his friends. Conan is blank-faced, even though her eyes are burning, and Nagata won't look at him, mouth tight with something that's either regret or anger. It's strange, unnerving. Yahiko's never had a hard time reading either of them before. "What?" he repeats, waiting for the denial, the explanation that doesn't come. At last, Nagata looks up, and his Rinnegan eyes catch Yahiko's and hold them without wavering. "We were following our dream," he says. "Like Jirai-sensei told us. Sometime pain and personal suffering is the only way to protect people. If we can control the world, there will be no more war." "Nagata," Yahiko protests, cutting him off sharply. "We thought that when we were children, Akatsuki was supposed to bring peace. We are." He's never seen Conan look so cold, so emotionless. It's almost eerie. Peace through negotiation only brought betrayal. "We couldn't," she breaks off, and just for a moment there's an overwhelming, aching loss in her eyes before she shuts it away and buries it again. "We couldn't lose anyone else," Nagata finishes for her, lifting his chin as if he's daring Yahiko to protest. "Madara." Yahiko's blood chills. "Madara. I told you. He couldn't be trusted. He was going to use us. Please, please tell me you didn't go along with him." "You were dead, Yahiko." Conan snaps, shifting like she wants to put herself between him and Nagata. "You killed yourself and we had to watch, and when everything was broken Madara gave us a path to our dream. The dream all three of us shared. Your way got you killed. So we tried another way." Yahiko's stomach turns, guilt and grief and horror in equal parts. They'd used to joke about taking over the world, ruling all the nations and using that power to keep the peace, but those were just jerks. They were kids. "Nagata," Jiraiya says firmly. "Give this up. There's no way out right now. Let us put the seal back on and we can sort all of this out later. You aren't going to win and you can't escape. It's time to face the other villagers and answer for what you've done. Nagato closes his eyes, takes a careful breath. Answer for what I've done, he asked quietly. What about what they did? What about Konoha and Iwa, Suna and Kuma? They destroyed Ame and never gave us a second thought. Their wars ruined our country, our village, our families. They've never answered for their crimes, Sensei. Why should we, when the scale is so much smaller in the end? Yahiko swallows against the memory of their childhoods, their country. Ame was still a shattered land when he died, and he wonders how much of that has changed. Not much, likely. Even if Akatsuki survived, in whatever form, a handful of years wouldn't be nearly enough to fix things. Conan makes a sound of quiet agreement. You should understand, she says, but instead of looking at Jiraiya, her gaze is on the red-headed Kunoichi, whose eyes narrow wearily at the words. You're an Uzumaki, aren't you? What happened to Uzushiya? Kuri never answered for that, did they? There was no one to hold them accountable. Even Konoha's only thought was how they could use you, one of the last survivors. Your village was destroyed, and no one cared. The woman's mouth tightens into an unhappy slash, eyes shuddering, though she doesn't look away. Konoha and Uzushiya were allies, she says. And they honored that. They couldn't get to Whirlpool Country in time, you know. I've made my peace with it. You shouldn't have had to, Yahiko says before he can stop himself, and this is the reason for Akatsuki. Because Ame and Kusa and Tani and all the other small countries that aren't considered great nations, they've never been given a say in anything. There's no way to band together, no power that can make them equal to Kuma, Kuri, Suna, Iwa, and Konoha. Akatsuki was the push to give them that, the hope that a small country could make its voice heard for the first time. The belief that one boy with Rinnegan eyes and a small group of dreamers could change the world. He can see the hope that rises in Conan's eyes, the way Nagato looks up at him, and... Maybe Conan and Nagato have forgotten the details, but Yahiko will remind them. He'll drag them both back onto the right path and out of this madness. Gods. Gods, Yahiko loves them both so much. Even hearing this, even seeing them here, in the middle of a battle like this, would never change that. Whatever they've done, he won't leave them at Konoha's mercy. Long experience has proved that the large villagers don't have any to begin with. Out of Jiraiya's sight, he flicks his fingers in a familiar signal, and he can see the moment Conan catches it. Her grip on Nagato tightens, amber eyes narrowing faintly as she subtly gathers her chakra, and Yahiko turns to fully face Jiraiya and the Uzumaki Kunoichi, shifting to put himself between the Konoha shinobi and his friends without looking as if he's trying to. None of this has ever been fair, he tells Jiraiya. You have to see that. Just because our countries are smaller doesn't mean we deserve to be fodder in other nations' wars. Nagato and Conan were wrong in what they were doing, but the facts have never changed. Jiraiya looks old and tired and a little angry. Yahiko, nothing in life is fair, he starts, as if he doesn't realize that that's the perfect way to spark every last bit of the fury that's been driving Yahiko since he was a child. When did their teacher turn into such a fool? With a growl, Yahiko flashes through hand seals he would know half dead, alters them with a flicker of chakra and the addition of the ram seal on the end, and focuses. 4 pillars of water surge up from the ground, encircling Jiraiya and the Kunoichi and closing in a rush. In the same moment Yahiko leaps back, feels familiar arms wrap around him, and then with a whirl of paper and the heavy bead of wings Conan's clone is lifting him, carrying him up in a dizzying burst. The real Conan is on his left, rising in tandem with her arms locked around Nagato's thin chest, and beneath them the green and brown of Konoha is falling swiftly away. Yahiko closes his eyes against the rush of the wind. Let's go home, he says, almost too soft to hear, but he can feel Conan's grip on him tighten faintly in response, the way she tips her wings towards the northern horizon. Let's go home, and then we can fix things, he doesn't say, but is absolutely certain that they understand anyway. There's a lot of work to be done, and it's about time they get started. This is just about the worst idea Kakashi has ever had. You sure this will work? Momiji demands, watching the way Kurama and Son are wrestling with wary eyes. Not a clue, Kakashi doesn't say, although he wants to very badly. Before he can come up with a better answer, though, Fuji huffs. She flips a leaf onto her head, and with a puff of smoke a girl appears, white-haired and dressed in red with 3 tails peeking out from under her kimono. "Thumbs," she says triumphantly, and snatches up the orb with one of Kurama's pajama trapped inside, unclipping the beater chain and pulling it off. "Stop being a stick in the mud, Momiji. I don't see you coming up with any better ideas. You want an idea how to deal with Kyuda-sama?" Momiji huffs. "I have one, the best one. We should run." Fuji ignores him, leaping up with the orb in one hand and scrambling back to Kakashi's side, practically throwing herself under his arm as he tries to split his focus between the kitsune girl and the barrier. "Here, Dogman, I think this is the seal that's keeping it stable." Kakashi doesn't flinch back, even as the chakra equivalent of several hundred explosive tags is waved under his nose. "We are going to need to get close," he says, and wow, this is such a bad idea, and Kakashi feels that if he's the one saying that, it should mean something. Momiji groans loudly, but starts to grow again, and in an instant he's the twice size of a horse, planting his paws on the stone and shaking out his frost-tipped fur. Fox 5 flickers around him, an aurora of icy colors, and his mismatched eyes open. "I'll guard you," he offers. "Don't let my sister get eaten, all right?" That's easy enough to agree to, since Kakashi doesn't plan to let anyone get hurt. He pauses, watching the fight, and feels small hands curl around his elbow as Fuji follows his gaze, amber eyes wide. "It will work, won't it?" she whispers, glancing up at Kakashi's face. Kakashi crinkles his eyes at her, trying for a smile he doesn't feel. Ma, it's like breaking a regular genjutsu with a ram seal. Cause a fluctuation in the chakra, and it disrupts the entire system enough for the genjutsu to shatter. It'll be the same, even with the Sharingan. Hopefully, but Kakashi doesn't say that either. This is a long shot, and if it doesn't work, well, Kakashi just really hopes it does. "Raid," he calls over the crash as Sun and Koku both go tumbling back. "Get Genma and Aoba out of the way." "What?" Raid demands, but is already too late. Kakashi steps out of the barrier formation, feels it shatter even as Momiji goes surging past him with lightning crackling over his fur. Like Fuji did the first time she came to Kurama's rescue, he skids to a halt, plants his feet, and spits a lightning bolt straight at Kurama's face. Kurama snarls, high and sharp and furious, and lunges with his teeth bared, but Momiji leaks out of the way, just barely jerking his tails to safety before massive jaws snap shut. Before Kurama can try again, Kakashi steps in, flickering through hand signs and sending earth surging up Kurama's legs to drag him down into the stone floor. Throwing his weight to one side, Kurama manages to wrench one foot free, but before he can pull the others loose, Momiji lands on his face with all 4 paws, snarling and swiping at his eyes. There's a scream of pain and Kurama tosses his head wildly, flinging Momiji off only for the smaller fox to catch himself in midair with a burst of fox fire. At the same moment Kakashi goes low, Fuji practically running on his heels, and calls up a twist of water that drives at Kurama's head. It knocks him sideways, just a step, but he roars with fury, red and black eyes opening as he turns on Kakashi, mouth opening in a wide, angry howl. "Fuji," Kakashi says, not quite able to tear his eyes away from the teeth that look as long as his whole body. "Fuji, now would be very convenient, thank you." Almost at the vixen cries. "1 minute, I'm almost." Sand wells up, hardening around them like a dome, and an instant later something massive, likely Kurama's face, slams into it, and there's another sound of rage. The sand sweeps away, but chains of golden chakra catch Kakashi's eye, tangled around Kurama's head and neck and dragging him back. Naruto, Kakashi thinks, and the sheer terror of Naruto being here, right now, with Gaara at the very least, is almost crippling. "Gaara, run," he snaps, bolting past the 6-year-old to throw up a right-hand barrier and block the sweep of Kurama's tails. There's a flash of blonde hair off to the side, and with it a dark head and a pink head, and Kakashi curses, slides under a swipe of Kurama's free foot, and sends a pillar of stone slamming up into the underside of Kurama's jaw. He snarls, shaking it off, but the chains take advantage of one moment without him fighting to pull tight, dragging him down to his knees. The night-tailed fox hits the ground hard, snarling in a way that rattles Kakashi's bones, and "Here." Fuji shoves the glass orb into his hands and disappears into a puff of smoke, leaping out as a fox almost as large as Momiji's current form. She lunges for the children, snatching Gaara up by the back of his shirt as he runs, and slides sideways to plant herself in front of them as Fox 5 flares. They vanish completely, even to Kakashi's nose, but there's no time to worry. He takes 3 steps, judges the distance, and shouts, "Kurama! Isn't it about time you went back to being short and grumpy?" Massive teeth snaps, and with a roar and a heave, Kurama surges to his feet, chains shattering as chips of stone go flying. He turns on Kakashi, lunging for him without pause, and Kakashi doesn't hesitate either. He flips the altered star ball over in his hand, feels the chakra within it shiver like the precursor to an earthquake, and hurls it straight into Kurama's mouth as the Kyuubi tries to grab him. There's a burst of violet-edged darkness, an explosion of chakra fit to blind, and then Kakashi knows nothing else. Chapter 73, Luminary. Luminary Loam, a celestial body, as the sun or moon, a body, object, etc., that gives light, a person who has attained eminence in his or her field or is an inspiration to others of, relating to, or characterized by light. From late Middle English luminary or medieval Latin luminaria, lamp, from luminari, from lumen, light, dot. In the heart of overwhelming nothingness, a single spark. Consciousness fades back in gradually. It's a whisper from a distance, a half-covered ember cracking through the ash. The first sensation is pain, a tearing ache all through him, traced with a deeper, throbbing sort of hurt. He takes a breath and it rattles in his lungs, shakes through him like it's the very first or the very last, and he curls in on himself with a quiet groan, trying to shut out the pain. Somewhere very, very far away, he thinks he might hear his name. Beneath him is something cold and hard, like stone, cracks running through it like a spider's web. The edges are rough and sharp, but he can't bring himself to shift off of them, to move enough to get comfortable. Too much pain, and with it an exhausting heaviness in each of his limbs. There's something that he should be doing, he thinks, but can't quite bring himself to care, or even remember what it is. And there are fingers in his hair. Light and gentle, easing carefully over his scalp and then sweeping down to brush his shoulders, repetitive and soothing. He focuses on that for a long moment, confused and fatally weary, and with painful slowness more details fade in, one piece at a time. Cotton underneath his cheek, and something firm, the smell of wind through a forest, light but traced with pine and oak and the scent of fire beneath, soft, tuneless humming, absent and careless but still comforting. It's a voice he knows, bone deep and as familiar as anything in the world, and he takes a shuddering breath that's almost a sob, curling inward with a helpless noise. Warmth engulfs him, covers him. The hands leave his hair and arms wrap around him instead as someone leans over him, halfway to a hug. "Sha," that familiar voice whispers. "Sha, Kurama, you'll be okay. It's been so hard, I know, but you're okay." Kurama sinks clawed fingers into black cloth, pressing his face into Naruto's thigh, and can't make himself open his eyes. His last image is of Obito's Sharingan, a wash of red blocking out the world, and he can't. He can't face that, the loss of control that comes with it. Can't face the idea of what Obito could have made him into, made him do when there are so many things newly precious to him in the village. "Naruto," he rasps, and it hurts his throat. "Naruto, Sha," Naruto says again, warm and full of affection. "Come on, Kurama, open your eyes. It's okay." It's not, Kurama wants to say, but even as he thinks it, his eyes are sliding open, because Naruto is his best friend, his lifeline, was the first person beyond the sage that Kurama would have done absolutely anything for. Naruto's death hasn't changed that in the least. The sight of a red-washed world almost makes him wish he hadn't. "No," he snarls, and it breaks apart in his throat, comes out rough and unsteady, and so full of rage he can taste it like blood on his tongue. Naruto makes a quiet sound, still leaning over him, and shaggy, roughly cut hair turned Sharingan red surrounds Kurama's face as Naruto presses their foreheads together. "Kurama," he says, somewhere between gentle and stern, and Kurama physically can't do anything but open his eyes again and look at him. In the shadows between them it's dark enough to ignore the tint of scarlet, and Naruto's face is lined and sad but is here. Kurama takes a shuddering breath, reaching up to curl his fingers in Naruto's hair, and forces himself to keep breathing. "Good," Naruto tells him, warm and fond, and presses his hand over Kurama's. "Focus, Kurama. You're okay. You're here, the Sharingan hasn't gotten all of you." The next breath comes easier, because that's true. Kurama doesn't remember anything like this from the last few encounters with the Sharingan. That had just been mindlessness. Now it's like some part of him is trapped, while the rest is under Obito's control. There's hope in that, because Kurama has never, ever stopped fighting, not once in his long life, and he refuses to let sage-damned Obito be the one to make him. He takes another breath, loosens his grip on Naruto's hair, and pushes himself up to sit. His muscles ache, and even as he moves a new bruise blooms against his arm, wide and dark before it fades again. That's good. That means someone is fighting him, someone strong, and is not just wreaking havoc on the village. Kurama drags a hand through his hair, steadies himself, forces his brain to work at more than a sluggish crawl. Bruises mean the power to hit him and make it stick, no matter how briefly, which probably means it's not just Kakashi fighting him. One of the other Bishu, maybe, or one of the cage. That's even better, because they can take care of themselves and won't be in as much danger. Kurama may dislike every one of the cage except Yagura, but they wouldn't have their positions if they weren't strong. If this is anything like what happened when Obito first attacked Konoha, he probably planted just enough of a suggestion with the Sharingan to make Kurama furious and then turned him towards the village. With any luck, someone stopped him before he could get there. "How are you still here?" he asks, lifting his head to look at his Jinchuriki, and his voice cracks but he powers through it regardless. "I thought, after breaking that seal with Yagura." Naruto grins at him, mischief and humor in his face. "I told you, bastard fox. I wanted to be with you, even just as a checker impression. I wanted to see you become the hero I know you are. And you did. You did." Kurama closes his eyes, but this time it's with relief, something close to joy, because Naruto spent far too much time around him, apparently. When he'd asked if he'd see this Naruto again, he's Naruto again. "Who knows," he repeats, faintly disbelieving as he remembers Naruto's parting words to him last time. "You asshole, you knew." Naruto laughs, and it's beautiful, uncomplicated happiness even when his face is washed with bloody red. "I didn't know," he protests, raising his hands to block the irritated slaps Kurama aims at him. "You could have defeated Obito and Madara and Akatsuki without ever ending up back here, and then I wouldn't have." With a rude snort, Kurama crosses his arms and glares. "Yeah, well, someone managed to infect me all of their bad ideas, you little bastard. If you hadn't spent the last 30 years spouting all of that friendship crap and smearing your ridiculous niceness all over everything, I could have been done a month ago." He is not getting choked up. There's no lump in his throat, no tightness in his chest. He's fine. Naruto laughs regardless, and his grin is nearly blinding. He leans forward, wrapping Kurama in a tight hug, and Kurama can't even pretend not to lean into it. "I knew you'd do it," Naruto tells him, burying his face in Kurama's shoulder. Something close to panic flickers, though Kurama shoves it down and buries it deep. "I haven't finished yet," he says gruffly, though he doesn't let go of Naruto's shirt. I don't know if I can, Naruto." Obito, his Sharingan, he took control. One blue eye opens and Naruto looks up at him. It's the same expression he used to give to Gaara or Sasuke or any one of the people he managed to save just by being himself. Sitting back, he reaches up to catch Kurama's hands, wrapping his own around them and gripping tightly. "Kurama," he says, and this is sharper, laced with a fierceness that Naruto never lost, even in the worst moments. Maybe especially in the worst moments. "Kurama, look around you. I am US." Kurama snaps. He tries to fling a hand out, to gesture, but Naruto won't release his hold on his fingers. It's all red. This is the Sharingan, and just like fucking last time, with Madara and fucking Obito and how they used me. Kurama. Strong, calloused hands catch his face between them, and Naruto stares directly into his eyes, fierce and focused the way he only ever gets in battle, ready and willing to overturn worlds if he has to in order to keep his precious people safe. "Are you going to give up, then? Are you going to stay here? What else can I do?" Kurama snarls right in his face. "I've never been able to beat the Sharingan. They always they turn me into their fucking puppet, and then when everything's over I get to scrape up all the pieces of who I was and try to put them back together. Are you going to give up? Why the fuck does it matter? I've probably killed everyone in that room already. How the fucking hell am I supposed to go back to that, Naruto? Fucking tell me." Kurama. You. Going. To. Give. Up. No. The shout tears at Kurama's throat, aches all the way through him and leaves him shaking faintly, but he doesn't drop the glare he's leveled at those unwavering blue eyes. Fuck you, I never give up, you asshole. 36 fucking years with you and I clearly lost my damned mind, so no. I'm not going to fucking give up. With a bright laugh, Naruto leans forward and kisses him on the forehead. Good, he says fiercely and twists to his feet, grabbing Kurama's elbows and pulling him up as well. He frames Kurama's face with one hand, and for a heartbeat Kurama is back in another time, another place, meeting Naruto's eyes levelly for the first time. He reaches up without even meaning to, curls his fingers around Naruto's wrist, careful of his claws, and a seal blooms beneath their feet, like a flower's petals unfurling in the dawn. Lines both familiar and foreign, massive in their complexity, traced with power that makes the very air vibrate. The Horatian components Kurama recognized the first time have been stripped away, and instead he can see the lines for containment, for form. A breath of relief he hadn't expected shakes through him, and he looks from the seal back to Naruto's face. I thought, he starts, but can't finish, and maybe a large part of his grief was knowing that even if he found some way back, managed to break the Sharingan's hold, he'd lost Naruto's original body. But this... Naruto smiles at him. That's what brought you here this time, he says, lightly pressing his palm to Kurama's cheek. Sasuke thought this might happen, so he made sure you'd be able to go back if it did. I don't know how many times we can use it, though, so take it easy on the shape-shifting, okay, bastard fox. Sasuke. Kurama can't help but laugh, and it's not even bitter, because of course the paranoid brat would have a plan to cover every possible eventuality that could end in Naruto's body being destroyed. It was their only commonality, the desperate desire to keep Naruto in one piece, but it was also one that Kurama never really minded sharing. Did you? He starts and then pauses because he doesn't know quite what he wants to say. Thankfully, Naruto has always read him better than anyone, even the sage. He smiles, full of hope and light, and ticks his head. I'm a checker impression, you grumpy fluffball. But the real me. I'm sure he got to see Sasuke again. I bet they are watching over you right now and laughing at all the bad choices you've made. Idiot, Kurama huffs and pretends it isn't even grudgingly fond, though he's pretty sure he fails miserably. All of my bad choices can be traced back to the moment I thought what would Naruto do and immediately fucked myself over. It's all your damn fault, bastard. Naruto laughs delightedly, leaning forward to rest their foreheads together again. Good, he says on a breath, and his eyes are the blue of a summer sky. Because, Kurama, you're the best hero I've ever met. You've done so much and come so far, and I love you, okay? I love you so much. Kurama isn't going to cry, he's not. His eyes are hot, and he closes them, but he can't resist the sight of Naruto's aged face. This might be the last time he sees it for a long while, after all. I had a shitty teacher, he manages and lets out a shaky breath. Hey, you too. I love you too. Always, I'll... Naruto smiles like he knows the ending of that sentence, even when Kurama himself is uncertain. Good, he says again. Kurama, be happy. No matter what, okay? Obito might have controlled you, but you're strong enough to keep going and face him again, I know it. You're strong enough that no one will ever be able to stop you. Not now, Kurama tells him, not anymore. And that means just as much as saying I love you, in a way. Maybe more. Naruto turned him onto this path after centuries of hate, and he won't allow anyone to drag him off of it, Sharingan or not. No matter how long Kurama lives, he'll carry this piece of Naruto with him until he disperses into chakra for the last time. The world shudders, hard and sudden, almost enough to knock Kurama over. He grabs Naruto's arm to steady himself and looks up, and... the wash of red over the world flickers. The seal beneath their feet sparks with violet and black. The cracked ground heaves like something massive is taking a breath, and Naruto laughs. For half a moment is brilliant with color, orange and golden glow, and he seizes Kurama by the shoulders. Kick his ass, Kurama, he says, and there's echoes of that expression Kurama saw on his face right before he went back in time, the implacable determination Kurama is so familiar with. Blue eyes are like steel, and his smile is the one that still makes Kurama impossibly, unwaveringly certain that there's no way things could end without some sort of victory. I know you can do it. One hard push and Kurama is falling down through endless darkness. No terror this time, no grief, and he closes his eyes and reaches for that thread of fierce resolve that was Naruto's last gift to him. There's red around the edges of his vision, a tide trying to surge back over his head and drown him for the last time, but Kurama gathers his chakra up and lets it spin around him in a hurricane. A breath, another. He thinks of Naruto, his old Naruto and the child Naruto. Thinks of Sasuke during safeguards, Sasuke clinging to Naruto and Gaara's hands. Thinks of F and Ujido and Karen, of Kushina and their newfound peace. Thinks of Kakashi, the way he looks after a kiss, the crinkle around his eyes when he smiles, the will that keeps him moving no matter what. He lets it fill his mind, not a distraction but a push, urging him on. The Sharingan's hold is like steel cables wrapped around his limbs, holding him tight, but Kurama breathes out fire and wind and fury, wraps himself in the power of what is found, what is built, and with a cry of rage that rips at his throat he tears the bonds holding him into 1,000 motes of spinning dust. Impact and light. Kakashi wakes to the sensation of being dragged, his flak jacket choking him uncomfortably, his back scraping over the ground. It's a familiar sensation, since his nin can lack hands and are less than mindful of his comfort when getting him out of danger, but he doesn't remember calling them, doesn't feel the faint pain that would come from drawing the necessary blood to summon them. There's an ache all over, but it's the ache of a bruise, not a cut. Confused, he opens his eyes. A massive black masked face peers down at him with odd-colored eyes, and Momiji spits out the collar of Kakashi's flak jacket, letting Kakashi drop all the way back to the floor. "Oh good," he says. "You're awake. Now we can all see death coming for us." That doesn't sound promising. Ignoring the pain in the back of his skull that speaks of repeated impact with the ground, Kakashi scrambles to his feet, sludding the last few seconds before his unconsciousness back together in his mind. The star ball, Fuji, getting Kurama pinned long enough to get close, and then detonation. He turns, desperate for some sign of success. Kurama is still standing in the midst of the rubble, hunched down like he's in pain. His head is bowed, breath clouding in great gusts that are hot enough to mist in the air, and his sides are heaving. As Kakashi watches, he shakes his head like he's trying to get rid of cobwebs, and his eyes are still superimposed with that horrifically familiar Sharingan, but he's not moving, his claws dug into the stone like he'd no intention of doing so, and the lash of his tails is contained, tight like it's an unconscious reaction to pain. Blood trickles from between his teeth, splattering the ground, and Kakashi has one horrific moment of wondering if that was enough to kill Kurama, if Kakashi murdered him accidentally. Chakra sparks, not red or black or violet but blue. As blue as a summer sky, traced through with flickers of white, and Kurama's eyes fall shut with something that looks like relief. His head bows and a ripple runs through his body. There's a long, low whine, pained in a way that makes Kakashi's stomach twist, but then, shard by shard, but by tiny bit, the vastness of the Kyuubi's bulk starts to fade away into white brilliance. Kurama keeps his eyes closed, his head bowed, even as his own form starts to vanish like shattered stars, like fireflies in the moonlight. The outline of his body fades, and within it Kakashi catches sight of something much, much smaller, dark skin and crimson hair and tattered cloth. He's moving before he can even think of taking a step. Fragments of bright chakra whirl around them as he drops to his knees in front of Kurama, reaches out, then hesitates, unsure if he should touch. If Kurama is hurt, or if Obito is still controlling him, or... Crimson eyes slide open, several shades darker than the messy hair that falls to frame them. Kurama lets out a breath that shakes with exhaustion, but he raises his head, and those familiar eyes catch Kakashi's, full of steady, stubborn will and an edge of vicious victory. He smiles, bloody teeth and all the treacherous, dangerous beauty of a hurricane, a wildfire, and Kakashi's breath tangles in his throat. His hands find Kurama's shoulders, then his face, and he leans in. Kurama meets him halfway, kisses Kakashi just as desperately as he slides his fingers into silver hair. His mouth tastes of his own blood, of fire and ash, but it's the most perfect kiss Kakashi can ever remember, and he loops an arm around Kurama's waist to drag him closer, right up against his chest and into his lap. Kurama gasps, fingers winding tighter, and nails scratch over Kakashi's scalp, but there's no time or space within him to care, because Kurama leans down and kisses him again, an edge of teeth behind the softness of his lips, the heat of his mouth. Kakashi hadn't allowed himself to think on when Kurama's human form burned away, hadn't given himself any moment at all to mourn the loss, but It had been there, the idea of it, eating away at his thoughts from underneath. One more thing taken from him, one more loss, only it wasn't. Kurama is here, and fine, and free, and Kakashi thinks he'll be forgiven if he never lets go of him again. Well, Kurama might take umbrage, but honestly that's half the fun. He wraps his arms around Kurama's lower back, clutches him tightly, and when they break to breathe he leans forward, presses his forehead against Kurama's chest and tries to even out his breathing, to let go of the adrenaline still singing through his veins. Those claws in his hair really aren't helping all that much. Kurama and a voice shouts, and Kakashi can feel Kurama lift his head, though he doesn't let go of Kakashi either. Kit, squirt, Kurama rumbles, and his voice sounds like he's been screaming, rough and almost ruined. He reaches out with one hand, and an instant later there's impact, two small bodies thudding against his sides. Both of Kurama's hands detangle from Kakashi as he drags Naruto and Gaara close, clutches them to him just as tightly as Kakashi is holding him, and then stretches out a hand again. Sasuke, you too. And a friend. Thank you. You were so brave, coming to help like that. More hesitant, Sasuke leans in, and Kurama runs a hand over his hair. Thank you, he says again, more quietly, and Kakashi gets the feeling that it isn't meant for anyone here. When he glances up, though, Kurama is smiling, so he doesn't dwell on it. You heard? The pink-haired girl who accompanied the masked carefully, looking Kurama over like she expects him to start bleeding profusely. Kurama shakes his head. Just a little sore, he answers and nudges Kakashi gently. For all his reluctance, Kakashi nevertheless unwinds his arms from Kurama's waist and leans back enough that he can slip to the side, landing on the stone and immediately pulling Naruto and Gaara into his lap. Kurama and I. Naruto repeats, looking up, and is crying, messy and desperate. Kurama and I thought you were gone. Gaara makes a quiet sound like he's been kicked and clings tighter. Kurama sighs, wrapping an arm around both boys and leaning down to press his cheek against their hair. I'm fine, he says, faintly gruff. I'm still here, and that's not going to change. No one can change that, because I'm here, and that's where I'm fucking staying, okay? It does help, actually, to hear that. Kakashi hadn't thought it would, but if there's one thing he's learned about Kurama, it's that anyone who tries to make him do something he doesn't want to is very shortly going to be in for a nasty surprise. He smiles, feels something inside of his chest unnod as he sinks back to lean on his hands, and tries not to let the heavy weight of his relief wash everything else away. There are still things that need to be done, battles that need to be fought, but just for now, this is good. Movement out of the corner of his eye catches his attention, not fast enough to register as a threat, and he looks over in time to see the forms of the two Bijou waver and collapse in on themselves. Rishi staggers a step before and catches his shoulder, but the big man pulls him back upright and they turn to look at Kurama, a relief equal to Kakashi's on their faces. There's a ragged breath, pulling Kakashi back around. Kurama is rising unsteadily to his feet, a hand on Naruto's shoulder as Gaara holds tight to the leg of his pants. I have to go, he tells them, gentle but firm. This is almost over, but there's someone whose face I need to pound into a smear. Are you going to get hurt again? Gaara wants to know, solemn and faintly scared. Shukaku says he changing like that is a bad thing. I like you anyway, Kurama and Naruto says stubbornly, but you give really good hugs like this. Kurama blinks at them, like the sentiment is still faintly baffling, even after all of this time. Then he snorts softly and says, I'm not going to let it happen again. And even if it does, I know how to get back now. I'll be fine. But the four of you should head back to the village before Yudakata, and Ujita lose their damned minds. Naruto makes an unhappy face, but Sasuke nods seriously, reaching out to grab Naruto's wrist. We will, he promises and looks back at the pink-haired girl. She gives him a shy smile and he adds, Sakura can sneak us back in. Too late for that, I think, given the way Matatabi and Chmei are yelling, Hen says dryly as he approaches, but he tips his hat to Sakura and smiles at Kurama. It's a relief to see you back to yourself, Kurama. Rishi snorts, folding his arms across his chest and glances down at the children as well. Hen can take them back, he offers. You going after the leader? Yeah, Kurama confirms, and Kakashi wonders if he means Zetsu or Obita, or even both. He levers himself to his feet and says with a mildness that dares Kurama to challenge him, I'll come with you. There's a pause and Kurama tips his head, regarding Kakashi narrowly. "It's Obida," he says, testing. Kakashi meets his stare without wavering. "No, you don't say," he drawls, and it still twinges, but not so much that he can't be a bastard about it. "I had missed that. Entirely. All the times we've talked about him, and how Kasame said his name, and our shared eyes. Asshole." Kurama rolls his eyes, but there's a quirk at the corner of this mouth that wants to grow up to be a grin. A breath, and he looks back at Kakashi, red eyes steady. There's fear in them, something dark and desperate and deeply buried, but he lifts his chin and says, "I'm going to kick his ass." "I'll help," Kakashi agrees, cheer in his voice that he doesn't feel, but when he reaches out a hand, Kurama takes it, twisting their fingers together. Kakashi pulls him a step closer, eyes still locked, and that relief is back, bone deep and desperate. Kurama's here, he's free. Kakashi will do everything in his power to make sure that no one ever controls him like that again. He doesn't think his heart could handle it. "Be good brats," Kurama says, casting a crooked smile over his shoulder. "Keep each other safe." "Okay, Kurama ni." Naruto says, and his expression is worried but his voice is steady. "If you need me and Gaara and Sasuke and Sakura to save you again, we will." Kurama laughs, and it's still rough, but there's only humor in it. "Let's see if I can't save myself this time," he proposes, and that grin is all teeth and blood and terror. Kakashi adores it. But I'll keep it in mind. Chapter 74, Side Rate. Side rate st ret, to blast or strike down, as with lightning, to afflict with paralysis or other sudden physical disorder, to seize with sudden fear, amazement, etc., to dumbfound, bewilder. From Latin sideratus, past participle of siderare, to be struck by a star, be sunstruck, from cider dash, sidus, star dot. Shisui is never ever going to disrespect a plant ever again, because this one is kicking his ass and he is somehow far less optimistic about his chances to win than he was when Tans was conscious and kicking right next to him. With a sound of utter frustration, he heaves Tans high up over his shoulder, thanks everything vaguely benevolent that Tans is a beanpole and not hefty, and lets a shunshin sweep them out of the path of a spear of branches. Through the whirl of dispersing leaves and wind, there's just enough time to see another surge of choking vines, and Shisui curses, ducks, and leaps for the top of Konoha's wall. From the mad tangle of greenery beneath them, there's a low, mocking laugh. Branches slide apart, and Zetsu grins up at them, too many teeth and too much dark humor. "Come on down here, little hummingbird," he taunts, and that smile is too wide and sharp for anything human. "I'd be happy to take that burden off your hands, you know. We're going to need him in the near future, so I may as well take him now. Dan. Damn. Shisui tightens his arm around Ten's waist, wanting to curse out loud. No wonder Zetsu had targeted Tens first, knocked him out barely 3 minutes into the fight, and then tried to drag him underground. Itachi had managed a fireball that drove him away, and Shisui had been able to grab their teammate before he got plant-napped, but Zetsu hasn't let up on his attempts. Now they are down their most useful team member in this match, plus a possible hostage, and also plus a deadweight they can't afford to put down anywhere, because Zetsu is a crafty bastard and spends far too much of his time merged with the ground. Shisui just hopes the other teams are having more luck than they are. "There's not going to be a future for Akatsuki, bastard," he snaps, and it has to be true. This is a last stand kind of attack, their weird statue is destroyed, Pain has been captured. How many more backup plans can they have, honestly? Zetsu laughs, eerie and wavering, and he doesn't seem at all bothered. "Maybe not," he agrees, grinning. "But Akatsuki has never meant much of anything to me, I'll admit. Just a means to an end." Well, Shisui wasn't exactly expecting him to come out and say it, but if this is a last-ditch kind of thing, it's not really that much of a surprise. Kurama's implied enough times that Akatsuki had a shadow leader, and Zetsu is slippery enough, has kept out of enough direct battles that Shisui's money has been on the plant guy being the leader for weeks now. It's another flash of movement, and Shisui is gone so fast he doesn't even have time to curse, flashing to the other side of the clearing, leaping through vine-shut trees, and ducking around a burst of dagger-tipped branches to land further down the wall. In the same moment, Itachi sweeps out of the trees, a dragon made of fire swirling around him, and the Jetsu lunges for Zetsu without pause. Shisui moves as Zetsu turns, flips off the wall and flashes through seals one-handed, then raises a hand to his lips and lets a flood of fire loose. Itachi's smart enough to dodge, and Shisui grabs for more chakra, clumsier this time but just as fast, and a screaming wind hits the blaze and it roars, doubling in size and strength. Midair, Shisui triggers another Shonshin, landing lightly on the wall, and braces himself for whatever comes out of the fire. The smoke is thick, blinding, and maybe that wasn't the best idea, but it's not like a clear battlefield is helping them fight anyway. Itachi, he calls, just to make sure his stupid little cousin didn't do something inadvisable. Here, Itachi says, materializing beside him in a whirl of leaves. He has his tent out, stained with sap and dripping white ichor from the few blows they've managed to make connect, but they are both running low on chakra by now, both battered. Nothing seems to stick to Zetsu, Shisui thinks wearily, trying to readjust Ten so he's not quite so off balance. The bastard just shakes off whatever hits they land, and dodges all the rest. Fuck, he mutters, catches the look Itachi gives him, and rolls his eyes. Whatever. Sorry to offend your delicate ears, I meant fuck this shit. Itachi rolls his eyes right back, shaking the goop off his sword. Tense, he asks, casting a quick, worried look at the older boy. Probably a moderate concussion, Shisui admits, and it turns his stomach. Tense needs a medic, not to keep bouncing around on Shisui's shoulder like a sack of rice, but Zetsu's after him. They can't risk letting the bastard into the village, and they also can't put Tense down, because there's every chance Zetsu will just suck him into the ground and bolt. Itachi's face slides towards grinness, and he casts a careful look around them, Sharingan spinning. The Sharingan is just about the only reason they've managed to keep up so far. Honestly, Zetsu's more than capable of fighting on two fronts at once, and he doesn't seem to be holding back at all. The wall beneath them starts to rumble. Oh, fuck you. Shisui yelps, throwing himself off the ledge and calling up a Shonshin that spins him across the clearing. He lands in the branches of a tree, Itachi a few seconds behind him, just as there's a groaning crack and the stone shatters, roots and creepers tearing it apart from the inside out. Somewhere in the shredding smoke, Zetsu laughs. Come to think of it, he says, that edge of vicious mockery still all too present in his tone, I bet I could find a use for your eyes while I'm at it. Yours especially, little hummingbird. That's an interesting power you have. Just like your grandfather's, isn't it? Normally Shisui is all too happy to jump on any mention of Kagami, but from this plied creature who's trying to take over the world. Yeah, pass. He'd much rather badger the Hokage for stories, or his mother. Well, maybe not her. She's scarier than Tsurutobi, since she has access to baby pictures. And Tense. And could probably show Tense those baby pictures. Gods, now there's a nightmare. It's just slightly possible that Shisui's brain is way too talented at entertaining multiple unnecessary trains of thought at one time and in the middle of a crisis. It's a pretty terrible way to keep from panicking, honestly. Leave Kagami out of this. Shisui snaps, bristling. And you can have our eyes over my dead body. It's not happening. Behind him, a spark of corrupted, rut-sweet chakra, and Shisui spins, already knowing it's too late, is going to be too slow. He catches the too-wide grin, the light of victory in Zetsu's incandescent eyes as he splits out of the tree with grasping hands. A massive scaled sword crashes down between them, shearing off the bough Shisui is standing on, and a warp snatches him up as he falls. Shisui has a split second to register someplace that's wrenchingly other, full of darkness and echoing emptiness and square pillars rising from the gloom, and then he and Tense and Itachi are all spilling out of another twist of space, landing in a heap on top of a section of wall that's still standing. Reinforced shinobi sandals crunch over stone as a man in a white mask steps through the rubble. His tattered Akatsuki cloak sweeps the ground, dropping from his shoulders as he moves to lie crumpled in the dust, and there's a gunbai in his hand, the long chain looped loosely around his wrist. The air of menace around him is practically a living thing, dark and heavy and crushing Shisui's lungs like nothing has since he was a new academy student. With a gasp, he scrabbles for a handhold on the stone, finds Itachi's wrist, and drags his cousin and Tense with him as he retreats right up against a guard tower. Tellingly, Itachi doesn't even consider resisting. With a cheerful chuckle, Kasame slings his sword over his shoulder and leaps down from the stump of the limb he was standing on, landing heavily and then leaning back against a thrust of jagged stone like he hasn't a care in the world. You've all been having fun out here, huh? He says easily, grinning like it's all a grand joke, like he can't feel the killing intent that's turned the air to molten stone. What's the meaning of this? Zetsu demands sharply, pulling himself fully from the tree and leveling a glare at the masked shinobi. Toby. What do you think you're doing? I had them. Toby, Shisui thinks and feels a shiver trace down his spine. Kurama had said he played the fool no matter what, acted like the dumbest sort of clown, that they shouldn't let their guard down around him because he wasn't really like that, but... One thing to hear that their opponent put on a mask, even Shisui does that, honestly. Another thing entirely to see him like this, easily twice as threatening as Kurama ever managed to be, even after saving them. Had them. For what? Toby asks, and his voice is low and dark and threaded through with menace. The Jedmaz is shattered. We need to find another way. Zetsu bristles. No, we need to fix it. The Jedmaz will work, the Eye of the Moon plan is all we need. The right mask tips ever so faintly. You've been a friend since the very first, Zetsu, he says, deceptively mild, but Shisui can feel an incandescent, unearthly rage vibrating through each word, can read it in the set of the man's body. Do you remember the first night I believed? Do you remember the moment when I agreed to help you, no matter what? There's a long pause as Zetsu studies Toby, eyes narrowed like he's looking for the trap in the words. Of course I do, he says, and the frustration and anger have been neatly buried, replaced with sympathy. Such a tragedy, what happened to that poor girl. But we can fix it. You know that, don't you? You remember what Madara planned to give this world its happy ending? Toby scoffs, low and sharp. I remember that you were the one to inform us that Kakashi and Rin were nearby, he says, and Shisui goes still, horror and confusion building. Because Kakashi and Rin makes him think of Tame Minado, and Tame Minado makes him think of the third member, lost to the war. An Uchiha, a boy with wild dark hair who always had a smile to spare for Shisui, who babysat and worked and helped old ladies carry their groceries home. No, he thinks, desperate to be proven wrong, but his mind can't stop, is already catalogued in movement and build invisible features. Obito. I wish I had found them sooner, Zetsu says, and he molts back into the tree, only to rise from the ground in front of the other man a moment later. The compassion in his voice sounds absolutely genuine, but Shisui can see the way Kasame's eyes narrow, how his grin doesn't waver as much as it does sharpen. Clearly they hear something that he isn't familiar enough to pick out. A few minutes earlier, and we could have saved her. There's a long pause, tense enough to leave Shisui breathless, and Toby reaches up. He splays a hand over his mask, reinforced gloves clicking against the porcelain, and then pulls it away. Obito, Shisui recognizes and has to swallow down his horror. Oh gods. It really is him, scarred and furious and cold, an expression on his face that the cheerful boy Shisui remembers would never have worn in 1,000 years. Yes, Obito agrees, and it rasps in his throat like the word is almost impossible to say. He lets the mask drop, clattering against the stone, and doesn't look after it as it rolls to a stop among the tangled vines. We could have. But that wouldn't have fit with your plan, would it have? If I saved Rin, there was no reason for me to remake the world. No reason to let Madara train me, groom me to take his place. No reason I should listen to you, or play your games, or abandon my village. And that just wouldn't do, would it? The malice in the air doubles, grows heavy enough to crush in an instant. Zetsu is still wary, but not yet running, and Shisui only wishes he were that resilient. If he could stand, he would absolutely bolt for the nearest cover, but he doesn't think his knees would support him right now, let alone allow him to carry Tans and attach away with him. He wishes they would. He really wishes that they would. Zetsu's expression wavers for a long moment before it slides into a concerned frown. Toby, did that Uzumaki brat start filling your head with lies? Maybe coming back to Konoha wasn't the best idea. That, Obito says, as quiet as poison, is not my name. Across the field, Kasame laughs. Zetsu pauses, studying Obito carefully. Madara, he amends, like it's a meaningless concession, and that brings its own flicker of horror as Shisui tightens his grip on Itachi's wrist. Easy enough, again, to hear that Madara controlled Akatsuki, that the whole organization was a puppet he controlled, but people don't talk about Konoha's most famous missing nin, the Uchiha especially. Shisui can remember 3 times in his life he's heard that name out loud, and one of them was from Kurama. To connect that name with the boy 5 years Shisui senior, his babysitter, makes Shisui's stomach turn. There's a long beat like Obito is considering this, like he's weighing it as a choice, but then he keeps walking without either accepting or dismissing it. You really left the cave while I was recovering, he says, flat and inflectionless. Why did you choose that moment to scout? Out of all the spaces for Kakashi and Rin to flee, why is it they ran right past the cave where Madara was keeping me, even though a straight path back to Konoha would have been smarter? Tactical genius, always thinking 10 steps ahead, even when he has to come up with plans on the fly, was Kurama's grudging assessment of Toby before they attacked the Akatsuki base. Hard to connect that with the clown Obita played, but easy enough to see it now in this man, laying all the pieces of the puzzle in order. Kurama must have given him the first piece, and now he's come to get all the others as well. Do you really think I have all of these answers? Zetsu asks, annoyed. Sometimes things simply happen, like how we found you after the cave-in. The ragged sound Obita makes isn't anywhere even close to a laugh. Right. The cave-in. On a mission where we weren't supposed to encounter resistance, where the IWA knew exactly who to kidnap to make me come running straight into their trap. Which I shouldn't have survived in the first place, but which gave Madara the perfect excuse to carve me open and make me a better tool while he breaks off suddenly and sharply, like something forced him to, and makes a dark, furious sound of frustration. Zetsu takes one step back, then pulls himself up short. Madara, he says, the prelude to a warning. Obita laughs, mad and deadly and wrecked, and his fingers go tied around the gunbai's chain. That, he growls, isn't my name, either. Space contorts, and between 2 heartbeats is gone. In the same moment Zetsu spins, clearly familiar with this tactic, and starts to sink like the earth has turned to quicksand. It's already too late, though. The ground rumbles, and even as Obito appears out of thin air with the gunbai already in flight, Zetsu cries out, fighting vines and roots that try to hamper him. The fan end of the gunbai slams into him, knocking him back and right off his feet, and Obito follows without hesitation, a flight of kunai bursting out of his other dimension like they've been propelled from a launcher. Half a second to get his feet under him again, and Zetsu spins with a snarl, one hand coming up with a lash of roots following. He twists around the kunai as if he's punless, snaps a kick at Obito, and dives for the ground. In a ripple of earth, he's gone, but the plants around them heave, suddenly surging with life. Obito dodges the first lunge, leaps over the second, phases through a spearing branch as thick around as Shisue's waist, and flickers through hand signs in a blur. One hand snaps up towards his mouth, echoing Shisue's earlier motion, but this isn't a stream of fire, it's a flood. Plants scorch, wood buckles, and in the midst of it something screams. Zetsu lurches up from the rock behind Obito, branch-like fingers stabbing, and Obito cries out. Blood splatters the ground as he takes a stumbling step, hauling himself off the Mokuden that pierced him, and he collapses to one knee. You ungrateful child, Zetsu snarls. This is your one chance to see that world you dream of. This is the only way to get her back, don't you realize that? The eye of the moon. Obito laughs, wet and rasping, and wipes the blood from his lips. Get her back, he manages, and bares his teeth in a death's head grin. You never understood a single thing. I don't want her back, she was never mine to begin with. In a surge of muscle and motion, he spins to his feet, yanking hard on the gunbai's chain. It goes flying in a sweeping arc, the chain almost catching Zetsu before he dives into the ground, and Obito catches the fan, twists, and throws it again with all the force of his chakra behind it. A dragon made of wood slams into it in an explosion of chips, and Obito ghosts through the aftermath, whirls up, and sends a barrage of shuriken whipping out of nowhere to slice through the grasping branches. He drops down through the aftermath, hits the ground, and slams a kunai straight into Zetsu's throat as the creature rises from the ground again. Shisui allows himself a moment to hope that that's a killing blow, like it would be for anyone else. It's all too easy to remember the last time he and Tense fought Zetsu, though, the way the burning husk stood up and laughed at them, their complete and utter inability to kill him, and Zetsu backhands Obito like he's a child, like he's not even worthy of the effort of a punch, and wrenches the kunai free. White ichor fills in the wound, smooths out into flesh, and Zetsu laughs just like he did back then, high and cruel and mocking. Do you know that this is, he asks, and it's the sound of someone delivering a final blow. You're betraying us. Of all the things Shisui expects, watching Obito crumble to the ground like a puppet with cut strings upon hearing those words isn't even vaguely among them. He's on his feet before he can think about the ramifications of it, shaking off Itachi's hand. Below them, Zetsu laughs again, looming over Obito where he's on the ground, clutching at his heart and as wide as snare. You're vastly useful, Toby, even now, Zetsu says, a patient parent addressing an unruly child. Stop this idiocy and stop letting other people cloud your mind. I won't end. Shisui appears between them in a whirl of leaves, already driving forward with his tant in hand. The blade slams into Zetsu's chest with all the force and impact of an exploding tag, as much chakra as Shisui was able to gather behind it, and the pliant man shrieks for half a second before he's gone in a burst of dirt. Fuck, Shisui mutters, but he doesn't hesitate to turn, dropping to one knee beside Obita and trying to see where he's hurt. His identity and Shisui's possible lingering affections for one of the few other expressive Uchiha aside, Obita has already landed several blows on Zetsu, which is more than Itachi, Tans, and Shisui together have managed. If they want to stop him, Obito surviving is their best bet. But Obito bats his hand aside before Shisui can pull his shirt away. He takes a painful breath that looks too short and shallow to do him any good, and his head falls back, eyes fluttering shut. His mouth moves as if he's trying to talk, but it's nothing Shisui can read on his lips, and the words don't come. Obita. Shisui says sharply, but there's no response. With a curse, he wrenches off a glove and presses his fingers to the unscarred side of Obita's throat, searching desperately for a pulse. Another aborted breath, and on the exhale, Obita rasps, heart, seal, destroy. His eyes close all the way, and his chest stills. Fuck. A seal, Shisui thinks desperately. Some kind of seal triggered by Zetsu's words, definitely, but heart. His heart stopped, so logically it's on his heart. Destroying the heart will destroy the seal, but that won't help with the we need him alive to kick Zetsu's as for S thing. And Shisui doesn't have time for this, because a blaze of fire at his back, blue-white with power and hot enough to burn even through his flak jacket and shirt. Zetsu recoils with a cry, vanishing into the greenery, and Itachi settles on the ground with a light thump, breathing slightly harder than normal but determined. There's no chance to fag him, but Shisui doesn't need to, they've always watched each other's backs. Instead, he turns his attention on Obita, lets his mind skip across 10 different scenarios and discards them all. But Kurama mentioned Toby could heal from most things. A destroyed heart was definitely never mentioned, but it's not like Shisui has a lot of other options right now, and it's not like it will make Obita any more dead than he is right now. Maybe this will work and maybe it won't, but it's their only chance short of translocating a Bijou, one of the Bijou who are obviously busy fighting, going by the chakra flaring around Konoha, to actually kick Zetsu's everything right out of existence. Shisui really hopes that whole enemy of my enemy thing doesn't turn around to bite them in the ass, but Obito said abandon my village when he was facing Zetsu. Maybe it's not anything even vaguely close to repentance, but it's something, Shisui thinks. He reaches down to grab his sword again, flicks the ichor off of it, and calls up his chakra. It burns green-white in the air, condensing, brightening as he channels it into the blade. It's not Kakashi's Kaidori, not even close, but it's a trick that just blew a massive hole in Zetsu's chest, and with any luck, it will be enough. Shisui flips it up, grabs the hilt, and slams the blade down as hard as he can, just as a surge of water sweeps around and past him. There's no time to look, to make sure that Kasame is going for Zetsu and not Itachi, and Shisui doesn't try, even though the urge is almost impossible to resist. Instead, he braces himself for detonation, narrows the blaze of chakra into as tight a lines as possible, and stabs Obito in the heart. For a long moment, there's nothing at all. No light, not even darkness. Just emptiness, and it's the most terrifying thing he's ever felt. Really, a voice says, close to his ear, though he can't see anyone, can't feel the whisper of anyone's breath or hear any sound of movement. She sounds disappointed, though. Angry, and he knows he deserves every last bit of her hate, but he'd never really thought he would have to face it in person. I'm sorry, he whispers. It's one of the first things he's said in years that hasn't been a lie. I know you are, she tells him, said but steady. She always was the strongest of the three of them. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. His throat burns. His eyes are hot. It's been so long since he felt the need to cry, like the heat of the rage inside him dried up every last tear. I don't know what else I can offer, he tells her. I'm dead. He knows that if he could see her, there would be that twist to her mouth again, the one she always wore when he'd done something more stupid than she expected. It hurts not being able to see it, but that wound is 7 years old now and the edges have scabbed over, even though he's never done anything to help them heal. The nothingness shivers and green-white light reverberates through it like the ripples of sound from a struck gong. Enough for you to end up here, she agrees, voice firm, but not enough to stay. That doesn't seem fair. Doesn't seem right, and he opens his mouth so say as much, but before he can there's a palm over his lips. Even if he can't see her, he doesn't need to in order to know she's giving him that same determined glare she always wore so well. Don't be an idiot, she says fiercely. Don't you dare. I didn't die so you could unmake the world. I died to protect it. You killed our family and I don't know how I'm supposed to forgive you for that. He's never expected forgiveness, but hearing it straight out like that still twinges. Gently, carefully, he reaches up, closing his fingers around a child's thin wrist, and really, how painful to think now about what could have been, what might have happened if the world was kinder. You wanted to see peace, he says, and it's not any sort of defense or explanation, but it's a thought. An idea, buried so completely so long ago, but he remembers now. I did, she agrees, sad and quiet. But no war for peace will ever accomplish anything. I thought you of all people would understand that. Maybe he did once, but it got lost somewhere along the way, buried under the hate and rage. They killed you, he says, and it feels like breaking. They killed you because of me. I killed myself, she tells him, as brutally honest as always. It was my choice. You have to respect that. It hurts, he wants to say, but he remembers that image of her beneath the bloated moon, blood on her lips and a hole in her chest. She'd been scared and is seeing the image of her terrified eyes reflected in his dreams each night. But she'd been brave, too, so achingly, horrifically, beautifully brave, and somewhere along the line he'd forgotten that about her. Her bravery was always one of the things he loved about her best. I didn't, he admits on a breath, and he falls down, pressing his forehead to her thin shoulder as her arms come up to wrap around his head. I know, she says into his messy hair, and this at least is warmer. You've always had a habit of forgetting the important things when you get angry. That green-white light flares again, brighter than before, and he can feel her sigh against his cheek for the first time. I can't forgive you, she tells him again. But keep trying. Keep trying, all right. Don't stop until the moment you end up here again. I'll be waiting, and we'll talk again. Obito takes a breath that smells of her, feels the cotton of her dress beneath his cheek, the soft brush of her brown hair. All right, he agrees, and this is one promise he'll definitely keep. Good, Rin whispers in his ear, and she kisses him on the cheek and holds him back into his body as his heart restarts with a blazing, shuddering beat. Chapter 75, Anabiosis. Anabiosis, ANBSS, a bringing back to consciousness, reanimation after apparent death, a temporary state of suspended animation or greatly reduced metabolism, a restoring to life from a death-like condition, resuscitation. From New Latin via Greek anabasis, from anabio and return to life. Shisui probably should have expected this part of things. No, 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 he cries, ducking the sweep of the massive sword and flickering out of the return swing. At the same moment, a spear of earth leaks up, and he curses, changing direction at the very last moment. Rock scrapes his sandal as he disappears, but he doesn't face-plant into Zetsu's jutsu, thankfully. It probably says something about Shisui's life that this feels like a fairly significant win. You don't understand, I was trying to help. Shisui protests, landing on the branch of a tree and stumbling one step. Itachi fends off a burst of Mokiden with a Kaiden Jutsu, and Shisui spares half a second of attention to check a right on in the same direction before he's bolting out of Kasame's range again. The tree gives a creaking groan and spits down the middle, cleaved perfectly in half by Chakra, and Shisui hates his life. Kasame chuckles, but there's no amusement in the sound at all. Looks to me like you were taking advantage of an enemy being down to finish him off, he says, and he doesn't glance back at Obito's still body, a gaping hole carved into his chest, but there's a tension to his neck and shoulders like he wants to and won't allow it of himself. Shisui will admit that's very much what it looks like, but it's not. He said there was a seal, he protests, and a series of shunshin will him across the clearing just in time to slice through a spray of branches that almost stab Itachi in the spine. Itachi leaps over him, intercepts Zetsu's grab with 3 perfectly placed kunai, and flings an exploding tag into the plant man's face. Well practiced in this move, Shisui grabs him and lets another shunshin sweep them away even as the tag goes off. In the smoke, Shisui can just make out the flash of a sword, the wooden wall that leaps into place to deflect it. Well, at least Kasame isn't only targeting them. Shisui can't help a glance of his own at Obido's body, can't help the curl of regret and horror all tangled up together that fills him at the side of an oozing hole in the other man's chest, but he strangles it down, shuts it away. No time for that, no time for anything, since one of Zetsu's clones explodes from the earth, vines in a tangle around him. They wrap around Shisui, drag him down even as he throws Itachi clear, and he hacks at them desperately. The clone makes a sound of pain, and the vines pull tight in a rush, wrenching at Shisui's limbs like they are going to draw and quarter him. He only has one hand free, but he slams his tat down as hard as he can, trying to cut through the thick creepers. The wood chips, but holds, and Shisui curses vehemently. Itachi ducks back in, driving the clone away with another exploding tag, a high kick that would have caught it in the face if it were even a second slower, and the vines don't go slack, but they are at least not getting tighter. For half a moment Shisui contemplates just setting everything on fire, but while his pain tolerance is probably enough to let him keep fighting even with severe burns, they'll affect his range of motion too much for it to be worth it. Which leaves hoping that Tens wakes up, important, but not productive, or making like a lumberjack. His poor tant, Shisui thinks, already mourning the effort it's going to take to resharpen the blade. A flash of movement catches his eye, and he jerks, instinct telling him to lunge in and put himself behind his cousin to take the blow. There's no chance of moving, though, not like this, and he shouts, "Itachi." Itachi leaps backwards over Kasame's sword, kicks off the big man's shoulder, and knees him in the face, then flips, lands, and sweeps a length of ninja wire around Kasame's legs. In the same moment, Zetsu lunges at him from the other side, and Itachi vanishes at the very last second, leaving the two former Akatsuki members to collide in a tangle of limbs and curses. It takes effort not to laugh as Shisui goes back to trying to free himself. Itachi is such a clever little shit, no matter how much he plays up that poker face of his. One of the creepers finally cracks, and it's just enough give for Shisui to wriggle free, unwinding his arms and legs as best he can. At least they weren't thorny vines, he tells himself, dropping to the ground, but there's no time for that either. He's moving as soon as his sandals touch earth, lunging in to skip off the flood of Kasame's sword and knock it off course as it swings at Itachi's head. As far as ideas go, Shisui's had better. Samahada immediately sucks at his chakra, makes him yelp as his vision goes fuzzy. He drops, scrapes together just enough instinct and brain power to turn it into a roll and then twist back to his feet even as he brings his tat around, one hand on the hilt and the other braced on the flat of the blade. Samahada slams into the much smaller weapon, and only a desperate burst of chakra keeps Shisui on his feet. Behind him, Itachi dodges Zetsu's branches, lets a dragon made of fire drive the creature back, and follows without hesitation. It takes effort not to turn and watch Itachi to make sure he's all right. Itachi's one of the best in Konoha, but he's 11. Shisui's pretty certain that most people, up to and including Fugaku and the Coda, forget what that actually means. Still, the massive looming shark man pushing him towards the ground is a little more urgent, and Shisui grits his teeth, braces himself, and tries not to let his feet slip. The bastard is strong, and Shisui knew that, looking at that giant sword he swings so easily, but he hadn't really understood the sheer muscle mass, especially in comparison to his own. "Why are you trying to kill us?" Shisui demands, and he can feel himself giving ground, the way the dull blade of the tant is carving its way through his glove and into the skin beneath, but he can't let up, even for a second. Kasame's grin is all sharp teeth and slow burn ender. "Did you know?" he asks, and the tone is light but the look in his eyes is terrifying, all broken edges and cracked pieces held together with a deep-set rage. "He told me his name." Fuck, Shisui thinks, a little weakly. So Obito had something unspecified but clearly meaningful with Kasame, and Kasame just watched a Konoha nin, nominally the enemy, stab Obito in the heart. Awesome. Perfect. Fantastic. Yeah, Shisui's probably not getting out of this one with all of his limbs intact. There was a seal. Shisui tries again. On his heart, okay. He said, and it was the only thing I could. He breaks off with a hiss as more of Kasame's weight falls on Samahada, and Shisui's arms almost buckle. Half a heartbeat to throw all of his force into holding that massive sword away, and Shisui just manages to find enough breath to snarl, "His family, damn it. I wouldn't." A surge of dark, malicious chakra nearly flattens them both. Obito, Shisui thinks for one fraction of a breath, releasing his tant entirely as he leaps back in Kasame's moment of distraction. But it's not. Obito is still a body on the ground, and this chakra is older, sharper, darker even than his was. As it rises, the plants around them start to writhe, the ground buckles and cracks, the stones tremble. Automatically, Shisui looks for Itachi, finds him lunging out of the way of a snarl of greenery that's falling like an avalanche, and triggers a shunshin before he can even think of moving. The world blurs, and the Sharingan is just enough to let Shisui keep things straight as he reappears, snatches Itachi up, and vanishes again in a whirl of leaves. They reappear at the foot of the wall where Tanz is lying, just as trees and vines and roots come alive, breaking through the surface of twisting and starting to move. In the midst of the mass, Zetsu straightens, several long cuts across his body sealing shut. His grin is wild and unnerving, splitting his face all the way across like he's about to unhinge his jaw and swallow them all whole. "I'm getting tired of you brats," he says, full of malice, and the world around them quivers, just waiting for his signal to lunge. "Brats?" Shisui demands, because his mother and Tanz are probably right about how not knowing when to shut up is going to get him killed someday. "You're throwing a hissy fit because we broke a statue and we're the brats." Zetsu's expression darkens and he glares at Shisui with all the force of someone wanting to literally set him on fire. "Centuries," he snarls, hands curling into fists. "I've been waiting centuries for circumstances to align, for all the pieces and all the pawns to take the board. And in the moment things come together for the first time, that little bread of an Uzumaki waltzes in and ruins everything. But no matter. If you've pushed me this far, I may as well keep going and bring her back myself, right?" A laugh, unamused and full of threat, and he steps forward. The earth cracks around his feet, a burst of greenery riding up out of it like a nest of snakes, and then surges forward in a wave. There's no way to escape it. Shisui tries for a shunshin, but even as he disappears, the spot where he was aiming to land is swallowed up, and he swears, changing course at the last minute. It's too late, though. In that split second of hesitation, something tangles around his leg and drags him down, and Shisui only just manages to snap, "Itachi, go," as is pulled towards the mass. Itachi doesn't argue. There's a foot on Shisui's shoulder, a brush of chakra, and Itachi leaps clear, landing on top of the wall. For a moment all Shisui can see is green, but he calls up a spark of fire that turns to a whip of flame, scorching the vines holding him, and manages to claw his way back to the surface. "Get Tanz out of here," he orders, and puts all of his authority as wrecking shinobi into the tone, because Itachi chooses the worst moments to remember he has a spine and a will of his own. Then there's no time to worry, because he's being dragged back under, buried by roots that curl around each of his limbs like they're going to rip him apart. They catch his right hand, and Shisui recognizes what's going to happen in just enough time to brace himself before the root wrenches tight. Shisui's fingers break with an audible crack, and Shisui's breath is punched out of him on a ragged cry. "Gods, that hurts." Still. Shisui is a shinobi, he can handle this. He can survive. A breath, another, ragged and ruined, and he doesn't let himself think about the way his hand feels like it's been dipped in acid, the throbbing agony where it's all he can do to shut it out. A third breath, and he reaches for his chakra, grabs for fire, and tries to get his other hand free. There's half a heartbeat when he thinks it's going to work, the first flicker of relief. Rough bark catches his fingers, wraps around them, and Shisui can't do anything but grit his teeth and brace for more pain. And then the drowning grain around him shudders, goes still. It's trembling faintly, and a hand is thrust down into the press, scarred arm and dark glove and pale skin, and fingers close around Shisui's elbow even as the roots and vines start to wither. There's a sharp jerk, a hard pull, and then Shisui is surfacing, stumbling into the hold of the man who saved him. Obito doesn't look up at him, face set in sharp lines of concentration and intent, and the spark of chakra in the air becomes a flood, heavy and tasting of sharp sweet sap in the back of Shisui's throat. He sucks in a full breath, cradling his hand against his chest and ignoring the drip of blood that means bone has broken the skin, focuses instead on the neat hole torn in Obito's robe with smooth skin underneath. It worked, he manages, and relief and trepidation are a heady mix. It worked. One corner of Obido's mouth pulls down, and it's an expression so far from the boy Shisui knew 7 years ago that he can't even begin to interpret it. "You're an idiot," is what Obito says, though he still doesn't look at Shisui. "You had the chance to get rid of an enemy. Didn't the academy teach you anything?" Shisui wants to laugh, not quite relief and not quite victory and not quite didness, but caught somewhere between the three. "What do you think I was doing?" he retorts, and it's so weird to know this is Obito, the boy who first showed him how to rig a trap. Weird to look down at him, since Shisui is a good bit taller, weird to see the scars, the darkness in his eyes, the age in his face. Eerie and incredibly unsettling to know that Obito is the tactical genius Kurama warned them about so sharply, that Obito is the enemy, always. That, at least, gets him a look, still unreadable, but with an edge of exasperation that's all too familiar. An arm wraps around Shisui's waist, and the air warps. There's an instant of vertigo where Shisui can't quite figure out which way is up, but then their feet hit stone. Obito lets go of him, takes 2 steps to the edge of the wall to look down on the battlefield, and the hatred in his expression is incandescent, almost inhuman. "Stay here. Zetsu is mine," he tells Shisui, barely above a growl, and with a step off the edge he vanishes in another twist of air. "Right," Shisui agrees belatedly and winces when a step back jars his hand. "I'll just let you handle the insane plant thing." "Cool." Zetsu screams, fury and forwarded rage, and the trees tremble. Obito flickers into existence in the air, a long staff already swinging, and around him shurikens sweep forward, propelled with more force than a human hand could give them. The weapons sweep through the reaching vines, and Obito dives between them, sharpened end of the staff stabbing down and driving through Zetsu's chest with a sickening, wet thud. Zetsu makes a sound of fury, more dagger-like root stabbing up, but Obito opens his mouth and breathes out flame, then leaps back up and disappears into thin air. There's a roar from somewhere in the mass of green, and a momentary surge of water that's quickly reburied. But an instant later Obito appears above the spot, dripping down through the roots like a ghost. A pause, and Shisui can't quite help holding his breath, bracing for anything. An explosion of flames and distorted air, a vortex of fire that burns away the covering greenery, and Obito hauls Kasame up out of the smoking rubble and burning vegetation. The big man staggers a step, but Obito catches him by the arm, pulls him back upright, and the look on Kasame's face almost makes Shisui want to turn away. "You're alive," Kasame says, fierce and nearly disbelieving. He slings Samehada over his shoulder, reaching up with his free hand, and his fingers sink into Obito's loose hair where the wild strands spill past his shoulders. Obito's smile is faint and crooked, but still definitely present as he glances up at Kasame. He doesn't touch Kasame in return, but he doesn't move away either, and his eyes meet Kasame squarely as he says, "If this is the foundation of Madara's world without lies." Kasame grins, all teeth, and in a surge of movement he whirls around Obito, Samehada sweeping out to carve a path through a wooden dome that tries to surround them. Drowning dense chakra shatters the jutsu, tears through creeping branches, buckles the ground, and Shisui is suddenly, vividly reminded that Kasame's nickname is the Tailless-tailed beast. Even after hanging around the majority of the Jinchuriki for the past few weeks, and seeing them use more chakra offhand and without thought than Shisui has probably used in his entire life, Kasame still manages to be terrifyingly impressive. "Oh, but we never lied to you, Kasame," Zetsu says, poison sweet, as he rises halfway from the ground. "The boy was weak, mindless without those lies to lead him, but you're full of resolve. Together, we can still save this." Kasame's expression darkens, but before he can answer, Obito snarls, phasing right through Kasame's covering bulk to slam the staff he's holding into Zetsu's throat. It's the move that practically got him killed 10 minutes ago, but this time, instead of pausing, Obito leaps, using his grip to drag Zetsu up and out of the earth. In the same moment, Kasame's chakra redoubles, the scales covering Samehada fluttering, and he brings his sword around in a sweeping slash that carves right through two-toned flesh. Zetsu screams, wrecked and wavering, and his form splits. Long creepers wrench closed around Obito like a flytrap snapping shut, but Obito drops to the ground, intangible, and then drives a kunai up into Zetsu's jaw. The creature reels back, and Obito spins, slamming a kick into his gut and launching in backwards. As smoothly as if they've been fighting together all of their lives, Kasame steps in, bulldozing straight through a thicket of stabbing branches and going in for another shredding sweep of Samehada's blade. Zetsu splits around it, flicks a hand and catches Kasame in the chest with a pillar of stone that bursts from the ground and then turns sharply to intercept the flurry of kunai Obito sends spinning at his head. Shards of wood fly, and Obito phases through them, drops to the ground, and flashes a hand sign. The air warps and fire streams out in a vortex, given momentum and force. It slams into Zetsu with a smell that's somewhere between burning plant matter and scorched flesh, and it takes effort for Shisui not to gag. Still, he's seen Zetsu shake off too many blows to think that's the end of it. And, as is entirely expected by now, there's a ripple of flesh that moves like that bubbling ichor from the mountain's graveyard, and Zetsu drags himself back together with an angry hiss. A useless little traitor like he can't even begin to harm me, he snarls. Give it up now and I might kill you before I rip that eye of yours out of your head. Shisui winces. If there's any threat that will move an Uchiha, it's that one, and surely even Obito isn't exempt from that. Obito's scoff is cold and derisive. Kamui is why you kept me alive in the first place, isn't it? He says, and it's not a question. The laugh Zetsu gives is high and sharp. Strains of the Sharingan run through family lines. But you came from a family that had never manifested the Sharingan before. Two civilians, one not even full Uchiha, and yet here you are, carrying one of the most powerful manifestations I've ever seen. Only the boy up there rivals you, did you know that? This is not a conversation Shisui wants to be part of, especially since it started with ripping out eyes. He doesn't take a step back, though, despite how much he wants to. He had known that Obito's parents weren't shinobi, that one of them was only partly Uchiha. It doesn't really explain the way people looked down on him as a child, the derisive whispers in the clan, but it certainly explains some of it. The Uchiha don't tend to like anyone who muddies their gene pool. Though, Shisui thinks with wry amusement, they just lost one of their main arguments against it in Obito. There's no way having mixed blood has weakened him at all. Before Shisui can find the appropriate words to tell Zetsu to keep his scummy hands off Uchiha eyes in general, and his in particular, Obito takes half a step forward, drawing Zetsu's gaze again. There's cold fury in his face, something deeply buried and clearly not new. You're not going to get any more Uchiha to go along with your plans, he says darkly. It's over, Zetsu. Zetsu laughs. I'm sure you think it is, he says mockingly, but I've been doing this for longer than you can even imagine, traitor. One setback is hardly going to stop me, and Konoha is just rife with ambitious brats who can be so easily twisted. What about that child, the clan head's younger son? So far under his brother's shadow, passing unnoticed, never good enough, I'm sure he could fit our needs nicely. Sasuke, Shisui thinks, feeling sick. He means Sasuke, bright and cheerful and adoring of Itachi. And maybe it's because Shisui has been a shinobi too long, seen too many people fall to darkness, but it's not unimaginable to think of Sasuke in Obito's place, driven to destroy the world in the name of saving it. People are corruptible, that's the tragedy of them. All someone needs is the right trigger in the end. Obito looks mostly unmoved by the threat, which is probably understandable. Itachi was too precocious to need his attention as a babysitter, and Sasuke wasn't even born when Obito's mission went to hell. He doesn't know either of them, but he does flick a glance at Shisui's face, no doubt taking in the horror there, before he turns back to Zetsu. No more, he repeats, flat and cold, and disappears in a ripple of air. In the same moment Kasame lunges as well, laugh rough but intent, and before Zetsu can retreat he has to duck Samahada's edge, the whirl of branches from Obito as he reappears, practically on top of the creature. The Mokuton puts Zetsu off balance, gives Kasame enough of an opening to flip Samahada up and bring it crashing down right on top of Zetsu's head. There's a spray of ichor, a wild eruption of plant life that makes the ground look like it's boiling, and Zetsu screams. A heartbeat later, a spiral of air spits both Obito and Kasame out on top of the wall, a handful of paces from Shisui, and Obito makes a quiet sound of tempered rage as he stares down at the riding vines. We need to find a way to stop him healing, he tells Kasame. Like this, it won't matter what we do, he keeps shaking it off. I think Kakashi and Kurama were saying the same thing about you after the fight in the pass, Shisui says, forcing cheer into his tone even as he's gingerly dropping into a crouch. It's less to make himself a smaller target, and more because his head is spinning from a mix of adrenaline, pain, and blood loss. Obito blinks once before his eyes narrow. A seal on his chakra, he says, making the leap in an instant. For a moment, he mulls it over, but then shakes his head. I'm not an Uzumaki. Kasame scratches his nose bashfully, nodding his head. I almost failed my sealing unit in school, he agrees sheepishly. I haven't improved much since then, either. Lovely. Shisue's pants at Fuinjutsu as well, so there's that idea gone. He grimaces, shifting his hand a little, and tries not to pay attention to the way his vision wavers and goes wide around the edges. Opening his mouth, he glances up at Obito. A flash of crimson, of black-edged red like a hungry mouth gaping wide, and Kurama slams into Obito with all the force of an avalanche, knocking him clear off the wall. They tumble over the edge, Kurama wrapped around Obito and swinging with his claws bared, and Kasame has time for a startled shout and a step before Kakashi hits him from behind, hurling him back in the opposite direction. An instant later Kakashi is passing in a flash, just slow enough for Shisui to catch his captain's glance at him, the cold determination in mismatched eyes. Oh gods! Of all the things Shisui forgot to account for, this seems like the biggest and most important. He scrambles to his feet, almost trips and falls headlong off the wall as his vision whites out and feels fur against his hand half a second before there's a sharp jerk. The vertigo is still making him woozy, but he catches sight of snowy fur and bushy tails and gasps out, "Thanks, Fuji, you're a goddess." Fuji, the size of a pony and rippling with fox-fi, makes a pleased sound as she holds him back by his flak jacket and dumps him on a more secure patch of stone. "Well, in 6 tails I will be," she allows proudly and crouches down next to him, eyeing the steady drip of blood from his broken fingers with concern. "Maybe you should save the jumping around for later." Later? Later implies that Kurama and Kakashi won't be so distracted kicking Obito's admittedly deserving ass that they let Setsu jump them and die in an embarrassing and mostly preventable way. Not that Kurama will die easily, Shisui is sure, but still. Why take chances? "No, no, no," he says, scrambling back to his feet with slightly more care this time. "I have to get down there, it's not what they think." While Obito is distracted trying to fend off one of Kurama's force waves, Kakashi sweeps in under his guard, knocks him back with an elbow to the throat, and punches him square in the face hard enough that Shisui can hear the crack of bone from all the way at the top of the wall. Fuji makes a deeply skeptical sound. "You really want to get in between Kurama-sama and that guy?" she asks doubtfully. "Because I might not be Momiji, but even I can still think of better ways to die." A good point, Shisui allows with a grimace. But is not about to stay up here and let them duke it out while Zetsu is still conspicuously absent. There's no time, and Obito said he wasn't an Uzumaki and he couldn't seal Zetsu's chakra. But Kurama is, and Shisui's willing to bet that he can come up with something. "This is stupid," he says, closes his eyes and takes a breath. "Okay, I'm stupid, oh gods, I'm an idiot, and if I make it out of this in less than 3 pieces I'm going to kiss tens. I'm going to kiss tens on the mouth." Fuji blinks at him, cocking her head quizzically. "Do all human kiss each other after a victory?" she asks. "The Dogman kissed Kurama-sama, too. Is it a tradition?" Kakashi kissed Kurama. Shisui really doesn't want to think about that right now. Or, well, he does, which is the problem. Especially since Kurama and Kakashi are both down there and Shisui is going to have to look them in the face in about 3 seconds. Shisui hates being a teenager. He particularly hates being a teenager surrounded by scary, pretty people with far too much power and the ability to flatten him if they decided to put a bit of effort into things. "I'll tell you later," he promises, dragging his brain back under control, pictures kissing tens how he's wanted to in a Loki, angsty, "I am too dignified for pining a wait I am not way" ever since they shared a room in Frost Country, and straightens. His hand is still throbbing, but it's ignorable, unimportant. More important is the way Obito just cried out, the vicious tear of a pajama through flesh, and Shisui opens his eyes in time to see Obito go staggering back, landing on one knee on the ground with Kurama looming above him. Shisui's known as the fastest shinobi since Namikaze Minato for a reason. His use of the Shunshin is unparalleled, unbeatable, instinctive at this point. He can do it half dead or half conscious or entirely drunk, manage to get halfway across Fire Country before running out of chakra once. This is nothing. A breath, a flicker of green-white chakra, and a whirl of leaves sweeps him off the edge of the wall, the world blurring with the speed of his passage. The field they are fighting on is large, but Shisui is across it in the space of a heartbeat, knocking Kakashi's tad to the side as he reappears in a burst of wind, braced in front of Obito. Kurama's in front of him, spinning orb of black and purple light at his fingertips, and Shisui watches it fly towards his face with a grim sense of horror, thinks this is how I die, isn't it, and... Kurama pulls up short, chakra spinning like a contained hurricane 3 centimeters from Shisui's nose, and growls. Yeah, Shisui thinks with a sinking feeling in his chest. This is definitely how he's going to die. Chapter 76, Salvific. Salvific or salvific, having the intent or power to save or redeem, leading to salvation, having the ability to rescue. From late Latin salvificus, from Latin salvus, safe. Shisui feels a little faint, and he doesn't think it's from the bloodlust this time. Words have scattered to the deepest corners of his brain to hide, but Shisui drags them back into the light as he retreats one staggering step, raising his hands. Oh gods, okay, that is, you are terrifying, have I told you this? Because, well, I thought so before, but right now... Shisui, Kurama snarls, and his chakra boils across the clearing like a living thing, as hot as fire and rage. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't just go through you. Terror bolts down Shisui's spine, and he takes another step back, almost tripping over Obito where the other Uchiha is still crouched on the ground, one hand pressed against the slowly filling hole in his shoulder. Because it's helping, Shisui says, and put like that it sounds stupid and pathetic, but Shisui still meets Kurama's furious crimson eyes as steadily as he can, and belatedly hopes his Sharingan isn't active. One thing to make Kurama face his taijutsu on a calm day when Kurama's in a good mood, another entirely to make him do it now, in the middle of a fight where Kurama has a grudge against the Uchiha in particular. The fury in Kurama's face doesn't abate, and Shisui can hear Kakashi take a step closer as well, not a threat just yet but a definite possibility of one. He's a monster, Kurama growls, the words vibrating with belly-leashed fury, and Shisui only just catches the indrawn breath from behind him, the soft but sharp sound that's somewhere between pained amusement and anger. Shisui opens his mouth, not to argue, because he can't if everything Kurama has told him is true, but before he can there's a hand on his elbow, his shoulder. Obito hauls himself to his feet as a swirl of water falls apart to reveal Kasame a few paces away, and Shisui doesn't quite want to take his eyes off the furious Jinchuriki, or something. Shisui isn't quite clear on what Kurama is, precisely, beyond hot and terrifying in no particular order, in front of him, but he turns his head just enough to check that he isn't about to be decapitated from behind. He's really not, because Kasame doesn't even look at him, just grabs Obito by the elbow and helps pull him upright. Obito leans into the hold, pale and spluttered with blood, and drags the back of his wrist across his mouth, smearing crimson over his scars before he looks up. His Sharingan is still spinning, and Shisui doesn't have time to say bad idea before Kurama is already snarling, furious and ferocious. One step forward, claws bared, and Obito jerks Shisui out of the way, spinning him around so he ends up halfway behind Kasame as Kurama advances. Startlingly, Kurama pauses. Red eyes narrow, lips pull back to show sharp teeth, and then his eyes widen, swift and sudden, and he snarls in a way that makes the air around them practically vibrate with rage. No. No. Fuck you, no, you don't get to fucking do this, you bastard. Shisui has absolutely no idea what's going on. He looks from Kurama to Obito and then over at Kakashi, who has one brow lifted in quiet confusion. What are you even talking about? The sound Kurama makes is pure malice and frustration, and he takes a step towards Obito like he's going to start swinging. Probably with a bitch-dama, knowing him. Or several. You don't get to fucking change sides and pretend that wipes out everything you've done, he snarls, and clawed hands curl like a threat. Rage kindles in Obito's eyes, and he straightens up, lips pulling back from his teeth as if he can rival Kurama for sheer predatory menace. You think I don't know that, he growls. Zetsu, he wants to bring someone back. That's all he wants. Everything I've done, everything I thought was for the sake of a better world, all of that is destroyed. I was used. Good. Now you fucking know what it feels like. Kurama takes another step forward, looming more than someone of his stature should be able to, and glares at Obito with more bloodlust than Shisui has ever seen from anyone before. Twice now you've turned me into a sage-dan puppet, and I'll destroy you for it. Fury slips sideways into confusion, and Obito blinks. He takes a step back, running up against Kasame's bulk, and frowns deeply. Twice, he repeats, not quite a question. Off to the side, Kakashi closes his eyes and mutters something that they are probably all better off not hearing. There's chakra rising again, dark red edged with black, and Kurama growls, low and rumbling. 6 years ago, he says, almost a taunt. Remember that night? You did it again just a few minutes ago. Everything I am, all the ender inside of me, you take it and you twist it, turn me into a glorified wrecking ball. Just like Madara showed you, right? 6 years ago. 6 years ago, and ender and the Sharingan. Oh gods. All the many scattered pieces of Shisui's common sense throw up their hands and surrender, while his much maligned self-preservation curls into a ball and starts gibbering quietly. Kurama, hot, powerful Kurama who Shisui tried to glue shoes onto, is implying that he's the Kyuubi no Kitsen. Suddenly a couple of those fetuses Shisui was not entirely able to resist are a hell of a lot more terrifying and very, very much more awkward. Apparently Obito gets it too, because his eyes go wide, and Kasame stiffens, free hand coming up to curl around Obito's shoulder as if he's bracing him. Obito starts, then stops short, shakes his head, and closes his eyes for a moment. Of course. Too much chakra for a newborn, so Minato had to split it. You're the other half. Kurama doesn't answer, just growls, but he doesn't need to. Suddenly a hell of a lot more things are making sense, even if Shisui kind of wishes that they weren't. At least Kakashi doesn't look even mildly surprised, Shisui tells himself. So there's that. Someone new, and thankfully it was the guy playing tonsil hockey with the Kyuubi. Yeah, okay, no, Shisui is not going there. As it is, he's never going to be able to look at his captain the same way ever again. You okay, kid? Kasame asks, amusement clear in his voice as he eyes Shisui. Shisui realizes belatedly that he has his good hand in his hair, pulling like he's trying to tear it out along with those horrifying thoughts, and he whimpers. No, he says. I'm not okay, this is, I have images in my head and they aren't even nice images. Captain, I can't. You the Kyuubi, you're fucking the Kyuubi. Obito's head snaps around, expression twisting into shock and no little horror, and he stares at Kakashi like he's never seen him before. Kakashi blinks once, long and slow. In my defense, he says mildly, as if he is in any way defensible at all, he kissed me first. The noise Kurama makes is nothing short of rude. He's still glaring, but this time irritation has beaten out the rage, and it seems more directed at all of them in general than Obito in particular, though there's still an edge of that as well. Fucking really, he demands. This is what you bastards are focusing on. Shisui flails an arm at him. It would be more dramatic and impactful with 2 arms, but even is not dumb enough to flap the broken one around like that. It's a legitimate concern, okay. You are and he is, and I want to know how it works, but at the same time, oh my gods, please don't tell me. Kurama stares flatly at him for a moment, then groans and kneads at his forehead. Fucking Uchiha, he says with no little disgust. The snort of amusement Obito gives is entirely unappreciated, in Shisui's opinion. When he offers up a glare at the older Uchiha, Obito ignores him completely, though, and instead meets Kurama's gaze squarely. I want Zetsu as dead as possible, he says, precise and sharp, each with a knife that's bright with poison. As soon as possible. Kurama stares at him for a long, long moment, eyes narrowed, fists clenched. Agreed, he says tightly, and then adds with an edge of a snarl, when this is over, I'm going to fucking rip your throat out, bastard. I don't want Kaguya having any parts back to this world, but that doesn't fucking mean we are allies. Obito's expression has a matching darkness, the line of his mouth a tight slash that says he isn't going to give up without a fight, either. Fine. Seal his chakra. I'll rip him apart. That, at least, gets a sharp grin from Kurama, all teeth and vicious agreement. They are both horrifically terrifying, and would be even if Shisui didn't know that one of them was a bijou in human form, Shisui decides. You're insane, he says, not sure if it's directed at Kasame or Kakashi. So crazy. How do you even survive? Kakashi gives him a look that might as well come with subtitles, the hello pot, I'm cattle is so clear. Because as a mature jounin and totally an adult, Shisui makes a face in return, pointedly tips his nose in the air, and says, one problem with your plan, finding Zetsu. He's not exactly here right now. Kurama's lip curls, like he's smelling something nasty. Oh, he's here. And I bet learning that he has 2 chances to snatch the Kyuubi just made his little black heart turn over in his chest. If the fucker hasn't given up yet, he isn't going to. There's a low, wavering laugh from somewhere beneath their feet, and Shisui twists on instinct, reaching for a kunai with his right hand before realizing at the last second what a bad idea that is and aborting. He's a little clumsier with his left, but the weight of the weapon is reassuring, grounding. Even if it probably weren't too much of anything against Zetsu, being armed is a definite comfort. Guilty, Zetsu says, and makes it mocking, a taunt that echoes from everywhere. Obito and Kurama both turn, not quite putting their backs to each other even as they survey opposite sides of the field. There's chakra rising, dark and oppressive, with a feel like rotting greenery and darkened swamps. Especially because I don't need to go after the others if I have you, Kurama. They'll come running, won't they? Kurama bristles, the force of his explosive chakra shattering the earth beneath him, sweeping out like a whirlwind to tear through the plants around them as they start to shift. Fuck. That, he bites out, short and precise, and wheezes back. Power gathers, spins into an orb of black and violet light, and he slams it down into the ground with a snarl. Shisui has just enough time to register something snapping tight around his waist, a weightless jerk that rattles his teeth, before he's yanked off his feet. He yelps, grabbing for his chakra, for a shunshin, but the thick vine around his waist doesn't tighten any further. It lifts him into the air and drops him back on top of the wall, then slides away, and Shisui staggers a step and almost collapses with relief. Then there's a hand on his elbow, another at his wrist to help support his broken hand, and long brown hair tumbles over his arm. Shisui. Ten says, and there's concern writ large in his features. Are you all right? Shisui's legs practically give out, because Ten's is here and fine, missing his faceplate and sporting a streak of drying blood down one side of his face, but conscious and clearly functional. Ten's, he says, and not even the morass of terrifyingly strong chakra below them can stop him leaning into Ten's solid warmth. I think I should be asking you that. Ten's gives him a look, reproachful and worried in equal measure, and loops his free arm around Shisui's waist. You're the one bleeding heavily, idiot. What did you do? It wasn't my fault. Shisui protests, the words a knee-jerk response at this point, and is treated to Ten's quiet snort as the older teenager hauls him back and away from the edge of the wall. Hey, no, we can't leave, I can't leave yet. My mendekya won't be of any use if you fade from blood loss, Ten's finishes for him. Shisui, if I don't get you to a medic soon, they might not be able to fix your hand completely. Itachi's fine, he went with Sasuke, but you. That thought settles like lead in Shisui's stomach, but he waves it off nevertheless. Then Mom and I can have matching prosthetics. This is more important. Ten's mouth tightens, but he doesn't argue any further, clearly recognizing that it's futile. Instead, he says, low and sharp, you worried me, idiot. Itachi just told me that you'd ordered him to leave, to take me away, and he swallows, fingers tightening on Shisui's hip. Oh, Shisui thinks, and even in the middle of a battle it sinks through his nose like elation, like joy. He coils his good hand around Ten's elbow, tugs until the other boy looks at him, and holds his eyes with all the intent that's inside of him. I'm okay, Ten's. Thanks for pulling me out of there. Dark eyes warm, and Ten's shakes his head, a shadow of a smile on his face. Reaching up, he twists his fingers into Shisui's curls, then pulls his head down. Shisui has just enough time for a surge of jubilation like champagne bubbles in his blood before Ten's mouth is slanting over his, tasting just faintly of blood and warm, so warm that Shisui just wants to curl up inside his bones and live there forever. It's sweet and quick and less thorough than he wants it to be, not chaste or anywhere close to perfunctory but cut short by circumstance, and as they pull apart Shisui catches his breath and just looks. Ten's glances down, a flash rising on his cheeks, and reaches up to push his hair back behind one ear. He opens his mouth, but nothing comes out, and for a moment he looks like he's going to bolt right down into the thick of things just to avoid having to look at Shisui. That's definitely not going to stand, so Shisui leans in, reaching out to tip Ten's chin up and kiss him again, still too brief but heady enough to make him ache deep down at his bones. He tries to put everything he's feeling into the kiss, tries to tell Ten's without words just how much he wants this, how happy even one kiss makes him, and a cry from below startles them both, makes them turn to find Kakashi being dragged under by grasping roots, and in an instant they are both moving, Ten's shaping the snake seal and dropping to his knees at the edge of the wall. His eyes narrow in concentration, and just for an instant the mock-hidden animated plants tremble, slow. In the same moment, Shisui shapes a fireball and lets it fly, small but pinpoint accurate as it slimes into the largest of the roots. The plant recoils, and an instant later Kakashi is gone, twisting out of the restraints and diving back into block a surge of stabbing branches aimed at Kurama. Tens lets out a breath, drops the seal, and instantly reforms it. The vines pulling Kasame down struggle against his hold long enough for Kasame to slice through them, and he waves a cheerful thank you as he shakes plant matter off Samahada's blade. Taking a breath, Shisui crouches down next to Tens, only partially to stop his head from spinning. He hesitates, but the urge is too great to resist, and he presses a hand over Tens's thigh even as he determinedly keeps his eyes on the fight. After this, he says, and pretends for the sake of his dignity that his voice doesn't crack, "Do you want to go on a date with me?" The look Tens flashes at him is fond and exasperated and amused. Shisui, are you more nervous about asking me on a date than you are about the sentient plant trying to destroy the world? This is probably one of those questions that has no good answers. Shisui seems to run into a lot of those. Maybe. Tens's hand closes over his where it rests on his leg, and he scoffs, "Idiot." Shisui beams at him. He's never been so glad to be insulted in his life. Breaking shit feels great. Granted, Kurama would much rather be breaking Obito's face right now, but is willing to admit that Zetsu's takes close second, a close second that's getting closer every time the bastard manages to wiggle out of the path of a mortal blow. Just fucking stand still. Kurama snarls, shaking chicks of stone off his sleeve as he whirls to follow the dart of malice that slides beneath his feet, heading for an open space. Kakashi is there, fending off more reaching branches, and it's hardly the first time Zetsu has tried this tactic, but it still makes Kurama furious. And the anger isn't much helped by the realization that Zetsu fights like Obito. Or, Kurama thinks, grimly amused as he tracks that streak of malice with another Bachdama gathering, maybe it's more that Obito fights like Zetsu, considering the asshole pretty much spent years with Zetsu wrapped around his body. They both use the same tactics, though spend most of the fight out of reach, appear just long enough to land a hit, and then vanish completely again. And the ground erupts as Zetsu bursts up underneath Kakashi's feet, grabs his limbs in a tangle of thorny branches as he starts to drag him under like some sort of trapdoor spider. "Kurama!" Kakashi shouts, jerking his head up just before it's pulled under, and his eyes go wide with betrayal and shock as they land on Kurama above them, Bachdama spinning as he crashes down. Impact, and wood chips fly. Zetsu shrieks and vanishes fully into the earth, Ica bubbling behind him, and Kurama curses viciously, landing in a crouch in the crater. "Cute," he says sourly, waving away the smoke from the popped clone and giving Kakashi a dark glare as the bastard drops his chameleon jutsu. Kakashi, of course, just gives him a bullshit smile and says, Ma, I was trying to go for realism, Kurama." "You're a terrible actor," Kurama informs him, sidesteps, and sends a wave of force at a brace of stabbing tree limbs. They crumble, and in the explosion of sawdust and kindling, Obito flickers into view, gunby abandoned in favor of a long chain that he whips out in an arc, wrapping around Zetsu's arm as the creature resurfaces. Planting his feet, Obito hauls back, pulling Zetsu off balance, and Kurama takes the opening without even thinking about it, lunging low and fast. There's a curse, a wrench at the chain, but Obito holds fast, and Kurama slams full force into Zetsu with a snarl, bowling him over and slashing with his claws, leaving deep gouges that bubble and fill. Zetsu hisses right back, body losing its form, stretching and splitting like he's going to wrap Kurama up in his dark form, the same way he did to get Obito to resurrect Madara in the 4-4. That thought is more than enough to get Kurama moving, calling up his chakra in one hand as he pictures the seal Kushina used on Obito on Nagato afterwards. One hand slammed into Zetsu's chest and Kurama can feel it shiver, starting to form. Zetsu's body splits into 1,000 shadowy streamers and dives back into the ground, and Kurama swears viciously, hitting the earth on his knees and driving a fist into the dirt in pure frustration. "Bastard," Obito mutters, shaking blood off his left hand where it's trickling down from the deep wound in his shoulder. He drags the chain back, coiling it carefully as his eyes scan the field, and his mouth is set in a deep grimace. Still nothing. It stings every last trace of pride Kurama has to have to shake his head, pushing back to his feet. He shifted. Again. How the fuck am I supposed to slap a seal on a liquid? Kasame laughs, though his eyes are still sharp as he steps up behind Obito. "I think we need a really big bottle," he jerks. "And a cork." One corner of Obido's mouth pulls up in faint amusement, but he doesn't answer. Can you lay the seal on the ground, like Kushina did? He asks instead. Kurama makes a face, because does the bastard really think he hasn't considered that? They've been playing what amounts to pin the seal on the blob of shadows for way too long now, and Kurama's considered pretty much every alternative. You fucking think I haven't, asshole? If I put it on the ground, he'll just go under it. The two of you must be related, Kakashi tells Obito pointedly. You both the worst. Obito rolls his eyes, shifting back onto his heels. This isn't working, he says. Yeah, genius, I think we fucking got that, Kurama says sourly and checks for any trace of Zetsu lurking. The bastard's gone deep, though, and shoved all of his chakra into the plants around them. It's almost impossible to get an accurate bead on him. Don't look so eager for this to be over. You're still getting a bichdama to the face as soon as Zetsu is dead. At this rate, by the time he's dead we will be, too, of old age, Obito retorts, scowling. If you could just seal him like you're supposed to. Kurama snarls, rounding on the bastard with every nerve prickling and fury like lightning in his chest. Fucking excuse me. You're supposed to hold him. How is it my fault you can't even manage that? I was holding him, Obito bites out. But you have all the subtlety of a cannon, so it's no surprise you can't hit him. This coming from the bastard who wants to use the moon to take over the world. Wanted, and that's on me, but... Kurama's tenuous hold on his temper snaps. No. No, fuck you, you don't get to say but and pretend it never happened. People are still dead. Naruto would be an orphan if you hadn't wanted to manipulate me. You killed people who were your friends, your followers. You brainwashed me and tried to turn me against the village again. Kakashi grabs him, and the wrench of a shunshin carries them up into one of the few standing trees, even as Kasame slams Samehada down in front of Obito like a shield, covering the Uchiha's back with his own bulk. The wind jutsu that tears through the field is enough to slice deep grooves in the stone, to make the tree groan and shake and nearly topple, and it's only chakra that lets Kurama keep his footing. He snarls, impotent but furious, but the wind's too strong to push through to get at Zetsu. Maybe, Kakashi says in his ear, standing and arguing in the open while he prepares jutsus isn't the best idea. Tell that to him, Kurama retorts, stabbing an accusing claw at Obito as the jutsu dies away. He leaps down, landing lightly and narrowing his eyes as he searches for any trace of Zetsu's malice. It's not like there isn't enough to track, but Zetsu is filling the whole area with it and is hard to pinpoint. Kasame wrenches Samehada out of the ground, stepping to the side and revealing a grim-faced Obito watching them. His eyes linger on Kakashi for a moment, then flicker to Shisui on the wall, then drop to rest on Kurama. Thoughts are racing behind his black expression, that same look of calculation and assessment that Kurama once saw him were fighting Kaguya, and Kurama loathes it, but maybe it's something to use. Just another weapon to defeat Zetsu with, and then Kurama can pound his face in the way he's itching to. He crosses the space between them in a few long leaps, landing lightly beside Obito, and murmurs quietly enough that no one else can hear, "Bye time." Obito closes his eyes, looking torn, and then jerks his chin in a short, sharp nod. Resolve slides across his expression, dark but firm, dagger-edged, and he steps back. Kasame, he asks, glancing back, and Kasame meets his eyes steadily. Whatever you need, the big man agrees. No more hesitation, no more debate. Obito steps back, closing his eyes, and says just loudly enough to reach the three of them, as much time as possible. Kakashi hums thoughtfully, then moves over to beside Obito. He flips a kunai up, catches it by the hilt as it comes down, and says lightly, "You two do the most damage to him. I'll keep anything from skewering Obito when he's not looking." Obito flashes a startled look at Kakashi before the expression shifts into a grimace. He looks away, eyes falling shut, and doesn't answer, but the line of his mouth looks almost like regret. "Be careful," Kurama tells Kakashi. "Don't die like an idiot or I'll laugh at your funeral." Kakashi's eyes crinkle and he leans in, using the cover of Kurama's tangled hair to tuck his mask down enough for a brief, burning kiss before he's pulling back again, mask in place. "Same to you," he says, and the tone is airy but his eyes are serious. "I'm too young to be a widower." "You'd have to actually be married first for that," Kurama retorts. "And I haven't hit my head that many times." "So cruel to me," Kakashi laments, and Kurama spins, catching a burst of Makiden with a shockwave that shatters them completely and drops into a crouch. Teeth bared, he faces Zetsu as the creature rises from the ground and tells Kasame, "Hit the fucker hard." Kasame laughs, shaping a hand sign around Samahada's hilt, and water bubbles up out of the ground, pulling around his feet and starting to swirl. "I'll try and leave a few pieces for you," he answers cheerfully and brings his sword up, dragons made of water bursting into the air and crashing towards Zetsu with a roar like a waterfall. Kurama goes high, leaping for the top of the wall, then flipping across the gap to land on a thick tree branch, a shockwave rippling up beneath him. It shatters roots and crushes vines, cracks the ground as Zetsu brings up a barrier of wood to block Kasame. There's an opening there, small but more than enough for Kurama. He takes it in an instant, throwing himself down to land hard, 1 foot lashing out, and he calls up the chakra for a seal so Zetsu will assume they are still stuck on that plan. Zetsu bends around his hand like he's boneless, snaps back into form and slams a thick column of stone into Kurama's side. Kurama feels ribs shatter as he goes flying, grits his teeth against the pain as they reform and twists hard, hitting the wall feet first and flipping off of it to land in a crouch. A Bichdama detonates the moment his hand hits the root-covered earth, and dust and smoke sweep over the battlefield, obscuring everything. Underneath the cover of it, Kurama calls up his fire. It's not Amaterasu, and for a brief, mad moment Kurama wishes that Itachi already had his Mangekyo, that he could burn Zetsu out of existence. This is the next best thing, though, and it comes without the insanity that is Itachi off the rails, so that's a definite plus. And maybe it isn't Amaterasu, but this fire burns white hot as he shoves a good portion of his chakra into the simple jutsu, curls around him like a friendly cat as he shapes it with a touch of wool and want. Within the cloud, there's a snarl, one of Kasame's blows hitting home. The swordsman's chakra flickers, ducking away, and Zetsu's malice is clear, sharp like a beacon. It's more than enough. Kurama shapes his flame and lets it go, a blue-white wave that scorches the very air. It hits the edge of the cloud that's dust and shattered wood in equal measure, and there's a low, ear-popping warmth as the wood dust catches. Fire flashes across the field in a supernova, almost slamming Kurama off his feet with the force of the backdraft, and in the midst of it Zetsu screams. Kasame's dome of water pops, hissing where it hits the steaming earth, and he straightens with a low chuckle. Clever is his verdict, and he brings Samahada around with a grin stretching to show sharpened teeth. Nearly everything around them is burning, but he looks unbothered, sandals crunching across scorched wood without care as he advances on the hunched figure in the middle. That makes it my turn now, right? Kurama snorts, catching himself with one hand on the wall as he wavers and risks a glance up at Fuji, Shisui, and Tans to make sure they are all in one pace. Fuji's out of sight, hopefully cloaking herself in another illusion like he told her to, and Shisui and Tans are both wide-eyed but unharmed. He turns back just in time to see Samahada practically carve off Zetsu's arm, the creature in the middle of healing the burns and unable to evade, and that shriek is just as satisfying as the last. Kurama cracks his knuckles, flexes his claws, and advances with intent. Maybe this time. The shadows boil and the earth shakes. More roots and vines surge up, predatory in a way no plant should be, and Zetsu takes a staggering step and straightens. His mouth stretches in an inhuman grin, too wide for the body he's wearing, and the bubbling ichor smooths back into skin. Too weak, he mocks, and the ground swallows him whole. Kurama has just enough time to catch the directed edge of malice in him, then brace himself, and the creature bursts up in front of him, branches like daggers, hands grasping. He splits into threads of darkness that tangle around Kurama's limbs to drag him down, and Kurama snarls, slashing at the strands, summoning positive and negative chakra as he fights his way free. "You'll be useful," Zetsu croons in his ear, horrible and taunting. What Jinchuriki would fight someone wearing this face, after all? You're the perfect weapon against them, and with you I can drag all of them right back to my mother. The Jedmaz will be rebuilt, and the Judy will be reborn. Aren't you tired of living like this, with so many worries, so much anger? Don't you want it to just stop? Kurama growls, sharp and furious, and raises a hand, 5 compressed Bichdama spinning at the tips of his fingers. Yeah, I fucking want it to stop, and if I tear you to shreds, it will. The explosion rattles his bones, knocks him back, but there's a howl that doesn't come from his throat, and suddenly he's free. Zetsu recoils, already healing but still hurt, and the air warps, bends, breaks. Kurama hits the top of a squared-off pillar on his knees and instantly bolts to his feet, but is not alone. Zetsu is riding on another column, and Kakashi and Kasame are falling out of thin air to land within. One last warp, and this one parts around Obito as he steps out, head high, Sharingan spinning lazily. There's a massive surge of chakra inside of him, every last bit of his reserves gathered and held at the ready, and the fury on his face is bone deep and burning. Kurama breathes it in like oxygen, feels it vibrate through him like a gong struck too close, and can't help the vicious smile that bares his teeth. This is the Obito who faced down 4Kage and the strongest shinobi in the world, who put the entire alliance on the defensive and would have conquered the world except for his change of heart. Kurama remembers this exact flavor of anger, this hatred that burned right through him, and it's a heady thing watching it be turned on someone else. And Sage, if there was ever a deserving bastard, it's Zetsu. Obito casts them one brief look before he turns back to Zetsu, and his voice carries eerily across the echoing darkness. I didn't mean for you to get dragged along with me. Kakashi, if this works, you'll have to open the way back. Kakashi stills, only the faint widening of his eyes showing that he heard Obito at all. And that expression, Kurama thinks. It's hazy, Naruto's memory of the moment, but he can recall a flicker of an image, a barren world with gravity that crashed like a vast hand, Naruto and Sasuke on the ground without a chance of moving, and Kakashi and Obito stepping in front of them. Obito taking one last look at Kakashi before the air warped, and the blows that should have killed both of them only killed one. Oh, Kurama thinks, remembering calmly the way Obito could cross dimensions with Sakura's help. Without a chakra source like that, it will be too much. Complete chakra exhaustion is the only possible outcome, even if Obito succeeds, and Kurama could say something, could stop this, but he doesn't. Obito. Kasame asks, taking a step, and his voice is wary, his body braced as if for a blow. There's a pause, a breath, and Obito looks back, catches Kasame's eye and smiles. It's bare and a little crooked, but warmer than any expression Kurama's seen on his face before. Thank you, Kasame, he says, for giving me back my name. Kasame's eyes widen, but before he can move, Obito looks away. He turns to Zetsu, just hauling himself up, and the chakra spinning just beneath his skin surges. Every molecule of air in this separate dimension shudders, and then space warps and splits, and there's blood sliding down Obito's cheeks, dripping from his eyes as he bares his teeth. With a lunge he slams bodily into Zetsu, carries him right through the hole in reality, and is gone. Chapter 77, Leal. Leal LL, steadfast in allegiance or duty, loyal, faithful, true, honest. From Middle French, from Old French Leal, Leal, from Latin idlers, legal. Send me after him, Kasame says, and the usual lightness is gone from his tone as he wheels on Kakashi, eyes hard. You have his other Sharingan, don't you? Wherever he went, send me there. Kakashi finally tears his gaze away from the spot where Obito disappeared, and Kurama can't even begin to read the expression on his face right now. I can't, he says carefully, precisely. Mine is a transplant. I don't have the chakra to even begin to know what he did, let alone recreate it and throw you across dimensions. Not that it matters, Kurama puts in, crossing his arms over his chest and meeting the glare that Kasame turns on him without flinching. That bastard doesn't have the chakra either. With how his Sharingan was bleeding, he had a few minutes left at most before it overloaded. Hopefully it does, Kurama thinks, a touch grimly. He can remember all too clearly how Zetsu used Obito's Rinnegan against his will to resurrect Madara in the 4th War, and he could conceivably do the same thing here, using Kamui to jump back across dimensions. If Obito doesn't have any chakra left, that means Zetsu's chances of managing it are slim, but it's not a chance Kurama wants to take. He's staying right here until long enough has passed that it's not a concern. Kasame growls, a deep sound that rumbles up through him like thunder, and grabs Kurama by the collar of his shirt. No, he says, the denial as sharp as the crack of a whip. He drags Kurama forward a step, up on his toes like he's going to shake him, and Kurama might indulge anyone else in any other circumstances, but not Kasame. Not over fucking Obito. He grabs Kasame's wrist, pries Kasame's fingers loose from the cloth, and knocks his hand away. Fuck off. He was trying to turn the world into a giant house of mirrors. The sound Kasame makes is halfway to a laugh, halfway back from a snarl. You really think he would have sacrificed himself like that if he still felt that way? The swordsman asks, and Kurama would almost feel better if it was a demand, if it was Kasame losing control. But this is just sad. Resigned. He chuckles a little, no humor in the sound, and turns away to hide his face. He said, "That's on me." He took the blame for his part, and this is how he's paying. Obito knew what he did. His goals changed when he reclaimed his name. You don't get to put everything on him. Only most of it, Kurama retorts, in no mood to be corrected. But, well, once is a coincidence, but maybe 2 times is the start of a pattern. Obito betrayed Madara and Zetsu again, even without Naruto's influence in this timeline, and maybe that counts for something. Something tiny and almost insignificant, given everything he's done, but still there. No matter how much Kurama wants to deny it. It's not enough for Kurama to go out of his way to save the bastard, though, especially so soon after his last encounter with the Sharingan. Kasame doesn't answer, so Kurama turns away, moves to where Kakashi is still staring, frozen, at the point where Obito vanished. He isn't certain whether the contact will be welcome, but Kurama still gives in to the urge, reaches out anyway to curl his fingers around Kakashi's elbow. Kakashi startles a little at the touch, jerking around, but when he sees Kurama standing there he manages a smile, small and crooked and just enough to touch his eyes. "Hey," Kurama says gently, and the adrenaline from the fight is still high, too much to be cut off by something as simple as Zetsu vanishing, but he keeps his voice soft regardless. "You okay?" Kakashi pauses, gaze drifting back to the other column, and then shuddering. He smiles, reaching up to tip his Hatae back down, and says, "I would have killed him if we weren't fighting someone else. Or at least I would have tried to." He would have deserved it, Kurama tells him, and Kakashi hums, but not like he believes the words. "You knew he was capable of changing sides." Kakashi still isn't looking at him. "This happened before, didn't it?" Kurama shrugs. "You and Minato and Naruto talked him around eventually. But then Zetsu hijacked his body and everything went to hell anyway." Another pause, but this time Kakashi looks back at Kurama, meets his eyes and doesn't try to hide the wryness there. "I'm not sure whether that makes it better or worse." Kurama could tell him that the first time around Obito died taking a blow for Kakashi, but he doesn't. Kakashi doesn't need to hear that, right on the heels of Obito's second sacrifice. Besides, the outcome that time was probably just about the best for Obito. He died without having to face the nation's justice, and while it was a noble gesture to die for his old teammate, Kurama has always sort of wondered if it was deliberate. After all, Obito should have been able to walk both of Kaguya's roads out of the way. That was just about the least Kamui was capable of. That he hadn't, that he'd then left Kakashi his eyes to finish the fight and disappeared, has always struck Kurama as a man finally choosing his own fate, rather than one pushed on him. And while Kurama can respect that, he's not exactly feeling inclined towards kindness where Obito is concerned, either. The bastard is a pain in the ass on a good day. "It happened," he says instead. "Now we need to stick around until we are sure Zetsu's gone for good. If he steals Obito's body and teleports back, he'll have to pass through this place." Kakashi takes a glance around the emptiness of the Kamui dimension, then nods. "The more chakra I can gather to get us back, the shorter a stretch I'll be unconscious afterwards," he says, almost cheerful, "so I don't mind waiting a bit." Right. Because this isn't the Kakashi who'd mastered the Mangekyo, this Kakashi can hardly use it at all. Kurama makes a mental note to bully him into training once Zetsu's definitely dead, and rolls his eyes at the idiot. "Don't sound so happy about it, bastard. Unconsciousness is bad, if you hadn't figured that out by now." "Really?" Kakashi feigns complete surprise. Suddenly the way all the doctors yell at me makes more sense. What the hell is Kurama supposed to do with a man like this, honestly? Whatever expression Kurama is wearing must be particularly amusing, because Kakashi chuckles. He reaches out, gently tugs Kurama into his arms and wraps him up in a loose hug, burying his nose in Kurama's hair with a sigh. Through the mask, Kurama can feel lips against his temple, breath against his ear. It's not objectionable. Not objectionable in the least, really, and Kurama leans into the warmth, the sturdiness of him. One hand finds Kakashi's hip, claws just barely denting the fabric there, and he breathes out, slow and careful. There's still a faint flicker of trepidation, buried deep inside of him, that every time he blinks he'll open his eyes to a red-washed world, but with Kakashi so close, something he'd never, ever thought to want, it's an easier fear to dismiss. "I'm tired," he says, too quietly for Kasame to hear even in the echoing darkness, and it's only when the words have passed his lips that he realizes how true they are. He's used more chakra today than he has in a very long time, between facing off against Obito and Kasame, changing forms, and fighting Zetsu. Seeing his Naruto, even just a chakra impression of him, lends its own emotional weariness, and so does the Sharingan. So does all of this. Honestly, Kurama had thought they were done with this changing sides bullshit in the Fourth War, and is not a fan of it reappearing now. Though it's probably better, objectively, than having to fight Kasame, Obito, and Zetsu to a halt on their own. A gloved hand tugs the mask down to Kakashi's chin, and he presses a kiss against Kurama's hair. A bed sounds good right about now, he agrees, innocent enough that it's absolutely meant as something dirty, and Kurama snorts and kicks him in the ankle. Bastard, he mutters and means it. But maybe not as much as he could. There's a long pause, though Kakashi doesn't let go and Kurama doesn't make him, just stays pressed against Kakashi with their hands on each other. Then, on a breath that feels like trepidation, Kakashi asks almost inaudibly, "What now?" Kurama closes his eyes, not entirely sure himself. If Obito's plan works, if Zetsu is gone. That's it. He's succeeded. He's won. What Naruto sent him back to do, he's finally managed it. He remembers what Naruto told him in that red-washed world, moments before the Sharingan's hold broke and the color flooded back. Kurama, be happy. No matter what, okay. And maybe it isn't a goal he's ever had before, maybe it's not as clear-cut and obvious as keeping Kaguya from coming back, but it's something he's willing to put his effort into. Something he's willing to live for, to focus on. Happiness, when for so long he's just been. But now, with Naruto and Gaara and F and Ujita, with Kakashi and Karen and the older Jinchuriki and even Kushina. Well, maybe that's what he'll try for, if this is really the end of his quest. He says, muffled where his forehead is pressed to Kakashi's shoulder, "Want ramen?" "I'm starving." There's a moment of startled silence, and then Kakashi laughs. It's soft and warm and genuine, and Kurama can feel it shaking through him, bone deep and sweet. Naruto and Kushina will approve, he says, and Kurama can feel the smile against his cheek. A little regretfully, he untangles himself from Kakashi, pulling back, and can't help but snort at Kakashi's sound of protest. "Hands to yourself," he says, though he doesn't quite mean it. "If Zetsu comes bursting back in here, I don't want to end up tripping over your lazy ass." So cruel, Kakashi laments again, but he doesn't let go completely, letting his hand slide down Kurama's arm until he can tangle their fingers and squeeze gently. "I hope you know I'm still trying to recover from the trauma of you attempting to eat me." "I'll make it up to you later," Kurama promises dryly, glancing over at where Kasame is standing, back turned to them, Samehada slung over his shoulder. Honestly, Kurama doesn't give a damn about the swordsman either way. He used to be an enemy, now he's mostly not, and if he goes back to being one, Kurama's only feelings will be concern over how to defeat him without Guy around. But loss is a familiar feeling, and as much as he'd rather not, he can understand that. Kuri's a different place now, he tells the swordsman, and means you could go back if you want it. The rumble of Kasame's laugh is viciously amused. "I'm sure it is," he says, still not looking back. "But nowhere in the world is as different as I want it to be. Not yet. Wherever I end up, with the shinobi world as it is, there's always the chance they'll ask me to kill comrades. To lie. I won't do that again." It's true, and Kurama can't argue. His Naruto was trying to better things, working towards change and an end of conflicts between the hidden villagers at the very least, but Kaguya had risen again before he could manage it. It was a promise he had made as a genin, spoken before Zabuza and Haku's graves, and he never forgot it, even in the very darkest moments. That was a world Kasame would have wanted to see, Kurama thinks. This time around, it might not happen, and Kurama knows it's selfish, but he honestly doesn't care. This Naruto is already happier than the one Kurama knew before, and he wouldn't change that for anything. If that keeps the world a little darker, a little harsher, well, Kurama's not going to complain. "You just going to keep being a missing nin?" Kakashi asks, and the tone is mild but the words are cool. "A mercenary?" Kasame chuckles. "I've killed just as many people as Obito, you know," he tells Kakashi lightly, turning, and his sharpened teeth are an unnerving flash of white in the gloam. "Konoha's yellow flash probably killed more. I bet your red-hot habanero's count is up there, too. We all dress it up as following a higher order, so what makes us the criminals and you the good guys?" When Kakashi doesn't answer, he chuckles again, though his eyes are dark. Yeah, exactly. Just the fact that you won. We were misled and lied to, and we own the deaths and pain we caused because they are our fault, but this whole world's filthy. I'm not signing up to stain myself with more filth, even if you think saying I'm fighting for something you approve of will make my hands cleaner. Kakashi is stiff at Kurama's side, but Kurama tugs at his hand a bit, makes him glance over, his tension slide down a notch. That's your choice, he says carelessly. You coming or staying when we go back to Konoha? There's a long minute of silence as Kasame clearly weighs his options. You don't have enough chakra to come back for me, he says finally, more statement than question, but Kakashi tips his head in confirmation regardless. Kasame's mouth pulls tight when he sees it, and he reaches up to rub at the back of his neck, ducking his head to hide the expression on his face. Leave me here, then. You're worried about Zetsu coming back. I'll make sure he doesn't. Kakashi glances at Kurama, one brow lifting, and Kurama looks back with a frown. That's not something he'd have thought Kasame would pick. And while it's a solid way to make sure Zetsu doesn't pull anything, it's also pretty much a death sentence phrased like that. I can come back for you in, Kakashi starts. No, Kasame interrupts, and he keeps his face turned away, but the flicker of his chakra is resigned and resolved in equal measure. They're not going to be able to change his mind. You don't have to do that. If nothing happens, well, at least Samehada won't end up with a second-rate swordsman. She deserves better than that. He pats his sword's hilt, and his laugh almost manages to be convincing. You're not going to end up jumping on board with Zetsu, right? Kurama asks, watching the man closely. He doesn't think so, but... The flare of Kasame's chakra is almost as heavy as Abiji's, dark with fury and edged with a hatred that Kurama is willing to bet is directed straight at Zetsu. No, Kasame growls. Not in this lifetime or any other. Traders all deserve what they get. Fair enough, Kurama decides, and there's very little chance Kasame could fake that kind of emotion. He nods, ignoring Kakashi's startled glance, and steps back. There's no way to let us know if you change your mind, he warns. Kasame's smile is wry, even if it's edged with teeth. I won't. Kurama nods, pulling Kakashi along with him as he retreats towards the edge of the column. All right, he says, as much of a goodbye as he's willing to offer, and watches as Kasame turns away again, putting his back to them before he sinks down to sit cross-legged, Samehada at his side. And maybe it's the most fitting end for him when he was so loyal to Obito in life. He died for him the first time around, and now he's choosing to do the same again. Apparently, even all of Kurama's changes so far can't erase some parallels. He's kind of getting sick of it. Kurama closes his fingers a little more tightly around Kakashi's, takes a breath and lets his chakra start to bleed into the air, into Kakashi's veins. Sakura used this technique often enough, in that ruined future, to keep Sasuke and Naruto going when they hit the edges of even their reserves. Simple enough to call it up after seeing it so many times, and Kurama might be tired, but his reserves are still 10 times greater than Kakashi's. A deliberate look is flashed his way, but Kakashi doesn't say anything, doesn't point out that he could have helped Obito survive this way. He just grits Kurama's hand in return, reaches up to pull his Hatayate straight, and lets his chakra gather. His Sharingan spins lazily, and around them the air warps, the world twists. Their feet hit stone, and Kakashi stutters, knees buckling. Kurama catches him on instinct, but is off balance, not quite ready, and Kakashi's weight pulls him down. They land hard on the top of the wall, Kurama on his knees with Kakashi half collapsed over his shoulder, skin suddenly clammy and sheened with sweat, and Kurama sighs as the ripples in space fade. Idiot, he mutters grumpily, pressing his nose against Kakashi's jaw. One breath and he makes a face, though he still doesn't move. And you reek. You need a bath, Todd boy. Kakashi chuckles, groping at his Hatayate for a moment but not quite managing to get a grip on it. Kurama does it for him, tilting it back down to cover the transplanted eye, and Kakashi slumps as the drain to his chakra immediately eases. He's not quite unconscious, but it's close. Want to share, he asks, giving Kurama a cheerfully lecherous smile that would be a lot more flattering if his eye wasn't dripping. I believe you promised to make things up to me. Kurama punches him lightly in the ribs. Perverted bastard. Try that again when you're not swooning in my arms. He staggers upright, hauling Kakashi up with him, and grabs him around the waist when he nearly faceplants in the stone again. Kakashi mutters, gripping Kurama's arm. Human limits. I thought those were for other people. With a roll of his eyes, Kurama steadies them, then takes a testing step. Kakashi follows him gamely, if with less grace than normal, so he keeps moving. Today is just a learning experience all around, isn't it? Kakashi-senpai. The cry makes Kurama and Kakashi both glance up to see Tans hopping across the tangled vines and roots below, Shisui behind him and moving a bit more slowly. One long leap and Tans lands right in front of them, hovering like he doesn't know whether to take Kakashi's other arm. Senpai, are you okay? Yo. Kakashi gives him a lazy salute and a smile that crinkles his visible eye, though his gaze flickers over first Tans, then Shisui as the Uchiha joins them. I'm all right, just tired. You too. Shisui needs a medic, Tens reports promptly and ignores the way Shisui squawks in offense. I have a minor concussion, but I'm fine. Having a concussion means you're not fine, Kakashi says, with the air of someone repeating an off-made point. Kurama gives him a disbelieving look, because hello hypocrisy, but Kakashi ignores him readily. To the hospital, both of you. Yes, sir, they chorus, and there's a brief scuffle as they decide who's going to lean on who. Really? Kurama mutters and then growls. It carries through the air with a heavy rumble, and Shisui squeaks and practically trips over himself, scrambling away. Tens looks between him and Kurama, faintly mystified, but before he can ask, Kurama says pointedly, "Grr." Shisui blinks at him for 1 second before his eyes widen, all the color draining from his face. You, he squawks. You threatened to eat me, oh gods. That you. He catches the darkening of Kurama's expression, just daring him to say it, and all but swallows his tongue as he flails his unbroken hand. You that threat? Not a threat, Kurama tells him, unimpressed, and curls a lip to bare his teeth. A promise. Now get. Shisui goes ghost pale for a beat before every inch of visible skin suffuses with crimson, and he groans long and loud and turns to bury his face in Tan's chest. No, he says plaintively. I know now you don't get to still be hot. This is not okay. Kurama rolls his eyes, unamused. Get him. Shisui squeaks, grabs Tens, and vanishes in a whirl of leaves. He is a point, you know, Kakashi says mildly, and when Kurama glares at him he blinks innocently. You are very hot. I'm glad you think so, Kurama says dryly, and pulls him up a little straighter. But I'm still not sharing a shower with you. Kakashi pouts. Honestly, Kurama has no idea why he likes this man. With a growl, he grabs Kakashi by the collar and backs him up against the watchtower, then hauls him into another kiss. It's not sweet or gentle, but full of teeth. He scrapes Kakashi's lip, bites at his mouth until he opens, then pushes in, kissing him hard as he fists a hand in silver hair. Kakashi makes a sound of surprise that turns into a groan, gets a hand on Kurama's hip and drags him up with a lead between his thighs. It's startling enough to make Kurama gasp, jolting in Kakashi's grip, and in an instant Kakashi has twisted and flicked them, pushing Kurama up against the stone as they slide downward. Kurama isn't entirely certain if Kakashi's legs can't hold him up or if he just wants them on the ground, but either way he lets it happen, keeps kissing Kakashi, desperate and furious, and Kakashi answers it, meets him halfway. So hot, Kakashi breathes against his mouth, then presses back in, gets one of Kurama's lips between sharp teeth even as his hands slip under Kurama's tattered shirt. He drags his fingers over skin, pushes up with his knee, and Kurama gasps and arches into the touch. The sound Kakashi makes in response is low and hungry, and he kisses Kurama again, all teeth and tongue intent. They part and Kurama can't help but laugh roughly, curling his fingers and gently scraping his claws over Kakashi's scalp just for the full body shiver it gets in. You not so bad yourself, he answers, and Kakashi chuckles against his throat, pressing a kiss beneath his chin and then letting his mouth slide down. He pauses, setting his teeth to the skin, and makes a noise that's halfway to a question. Kurama's been in the passenger seat for this way too many times, because Sasuke and Naruto were both possessive bastards. It shouldn't even be hot anymore, because watching two teenagers suck on each other's necks was anything but attractive. Common sense means nothing at all, though, in the face of Kakashi's hot breath on his skin, the scrape of teeth, the clutch of his hands, tight and grounding against Kurama's ribs. Fuck yes, he manages, more breathless than he'd intended to sound but unable to care about it, and his fingers tighten in Kakashi's hair as Kakashi bites gently at his throat, lays the quartz skin as he runs his fingers up Kurama's chest. It sends shivers through Kurama with each touch, and he groans, free hand finding the back of Kakashi's flak jacket. He pulls once, hard, and Kakashi breaks away, surging up to kiss him again, messy and perfect. If you could keep that from healing, he says between slanting kisses, I'd be much obliged. Kurama laughs, curls a leg over his hip and drags him closer until their chests are pressed together. Fuck that. You'll just have to give me another one. The sound Kakashi makes is dark and interested, and he crushes their mouths together, tasting, pressing up and in. And overbalances, almost face-planting in the wall behind Kurama's shoulder. There's a moment of absolute silence before Kakashi groans, and it's definitely not sexy this time. He slumps down, and Kurama unwinds himself enough for Kakashi to drop his head onto Kurama's shoulder with a sound of despair. Poor bastard, Kurama says, and doesn't even try to keep the amusement out of his voice. The mind is willing but the body is suffering from borderline chakra exhaustion, huh? Kakashi bats at him ineffectually. I can't tell if my head is spinning from kissing you or because I'm about to pass out, he complains. The latter, Kurama decides, and nudges Kakashi back so he can get to his feet. He hauls one long arm over his shoulder and pulls Kakashi up as well, then calls, "Hey, Fuji, you still around?" From the tangle of greenery below, there's a scuffle, and an instant later a white shape is bounding up the broken stone and skidding to a halt in front of them. Kurama-sama, the vixen says brightly. Did you win? Kurama laughs, because they did. Zetsu is gone, trapped in another dimension, and even if he possesses Obido's body and makes it back before Obido's eyes burn out completely, Kasame is waiting, ready to avenge his partner. They won, and now Kaguya has no way back into the world. It's finished. The last request Naruto made of him has been fulfilled, and there's no way for that dark future to happen again. Yeah, Fuji, he says, and the words crack just a little in his throat. We won. It's over. Fuji gives him a fox grin, all dagger teeth and lolling tongue, and turns sideways so they can slide onto her back. Good for you, Kurama-sama. Did the dogmen get hurt again? I take offense to that, Kakashi says mildly, but the effect is spoiled by the fact that he almost slides right over Fuji's back to land in the dirt. Kurama only just catches him in time, sliding on behind him and wrapping an arm around his waist. Yeah, he agrees dryly, ignoring the pout Kakashi aims at him. He did. If you could take us to the hospital, that would be great. Kakashi protests, but Fuji is already moving, leaping forward in a surge of sleek muscle that carries them over the side of the wall and into the streets beyond. It's cold and dim and quiet, empty of any noise beyond Kasame's own breathing. He evens out each breath, makes them deliberate and careful as he lets his mind slip into the half-watchful, half-meditative state that can stand in for sleep in a pinch. It's been a long day and he's tired, but that bastard doesn't have the chakra either. With how his Sharingan was bleeding, he had a few minutes left at most before it overloaded, Kurama had said. A few minutes isn't much, and Kasame knows it. Knows the odds, or can guess them, but he still can't bring himself to regret his choice. Kurama and the Kopinin are gone, and he hopes they have a happy life, but for him, this is the best option. Maybe Agura would have welcomed him back to Kuri, but Kasame has felt the bite of that betrayal once already. He's endured being hated for following orders, endured finding out that killing his comrades was nothing but a faucet built on a trader's lies. Obito was the one who shared his vision, who wanted a world where that couldn't happen, where children went soldiers too, and the strength of their desire for that made them blind. Zetsu took advantage of them, twisted their goals, and Kasame hates it with a low, burning wrath that settled deep in his bones. They did so many things in pursuit of their goals, and Kasame didn't regret them at the time, but now the ends no longer justify the means. Kasame is a man used to regrets. He's had so many of them over the course of his life, and when Obito had approached him in Kuri he had believed they were done with. Too much to hope for, apparently. And what does it say about him that he still doesn't regret meeting someone like Obito, someone he can give his loyalty to and not have it casually betrayed? Another breath and he opens his eyes, takes in the dimension created by Obito's Sharingan, and wishes he had moved fast enough, been wary enough to follow Obito when he knocked Zetsu into the portal. He hadn't expected it, hadn't even known it was a possibility, but one look at Obido's face had told him that the other man didn't expect to make it back. Thank you, Kasame, for giving me back my name. There's no reason in the world for Kasame to stay here, except that there's every reason. He has nowhere else to go, and even if he did, well, this isn't such a bad way to die if his hopes come to nothing in the end. Loyalty is built on faith, though. And Kasame's faith is telling him that this isn't the end. A flicker of chakra curls through the air, and Kasame raises his head. Another flicker, just a touch, and he gets to his feet, gathers Samahada up and wakes her with a thought. Another moment stretching out into a minute of nothing at all, but Kasame holds steady, watches the empty air of this strange world end. Space warps in a tight spiral and a form falls through, missing the colon. Kasame lunges as fast as he's ever moved before and sweeps the battered body out of the air, clutching it to his chest before he lands lightly on the next pillar, careful not to jar his burden. Probably some level of stupid to get so close without checking, but Kasame knows the taste and feel of this chakra, has spent years close to it at this point. He knows who he's holding. Carefully, gently, he crouches down, letting Obido slip from his hold to settle on the ground. Pale fingers clutch his cloak, desperate not to let go, and Kasame doesn't make him. He puts a hand on Obido's cheek, tips his head back enough to see his face, and feels a flicker of concern at the wide, dark streaks of tacky blood down both of his cheeks. "You okay?" he asks, brushing at one of them with his thumb. It smears, not yet dry but at least not fresh, and Kasame's just grateful the bleeding stopped. He's decent at first aid, but something like that would be beyond his skill. Sharingan eyes stay closed even when Obida raises his head and turns his face towards Kasame. A hand coils around Kasame's wrist, gentle but firm, and Obida rasts, "I have enough chakra for one more jump." Where? There's an offer implied in the words, one that makes Kasame smile despite himself. He brushes his thumb across Obido's cheek again, less to get rid of the blood and more for the feel of scarred skin beneath the pad of his finger, and the answer is as easy as breathing. "Wherever you want to go, boss." Obida pauses, and Kasame can practically see him gathering his arguments. Another moment, and he says, "Kasame, I promised Ren, I said I'd try to a time." Kasame tips one shoulder in a casual shrug, knows Obida can feel it since they're so close. Seems like that's the kind of thing I should be doing, too. Might be a bit easier if we're together. For a moment he thinks Obida is going to keep arguing, has all of his rebuttals lined up and ready, but Obida stops short before the words can escape. He takes a shuddering breath and leans forward, his forehead falling to rest against Kasame's chest, says nothing at all. With a quiet chuckle, Kasame slings Samahada over his back, then wraps an arm around Obido's shoulders, slides the other beneath his knees, and rises to his feet with Obida in his arms. "Where to?" he asks and keeps his voice light. It's far, far easier than it would have been a few minutes ago. "When country," Obida says, and an instant later the heat hits Kasame like a vast hand. His sandals sink into a sand dune as a burning breeze twists past him, carrying a wash of fine dust with it. There's a formation of rocks behind them that cast long shadows against the sand, and Kasame makes for the small opening he can see between the spires of stone. Behind them, the warp vanishes, but Kasame pays it no attention, ducking into the relatively cooler shade of a tiny cave before he sinks into a crouch again. "Here," he tells Obida, who slides down to sit on the sandy floor, carefully unknotting his fingers from Kasame's cloak. Dark eyes drift open, but they don't focus, even when Kasame reaches up to brush his hair back from his face. Just like he thought during the fight, when Obida came back to life and pulled him out of the muck-eaten strangling grasp, it's soft. So much softer than it looks, and Kasame has to smile at the feel of it sliding through his fingers. "You're blind," he says, though it's probably not the sort of thing that needs to be voiced. Obido's smile is small and crooked. "My eyes couldn't handle the strain of using them like that. It's fine. I'll survive." "You will," Kasame agrees, but keeps the "I'll make sure you do" to himself, unsure if it would be welcome. He hesitates and then asks, "Zetsu's gone?" This time, the curl of Obido's smile is almost vicious. "I left him in a world with extreme gravity and no life anywhere, not even plants. He's going to rot there for the rest of eternity." Kasame chuckles, entirely pleased with the thought, and settles down next to Obida, leaning back against the wall of the cave. "Good," he says. "So what next, boss?" Obito gropes across the floor for a moment before he finds Kasame's knee, follows it up to his hand. He squeezes Kasame's wrist, then presses something into his hand. A kunai, Kasame realizes, glancing at it. Please, Obito says quietly. Use my name. Warmth curls in Kasame's chest, and he catches Obito's fingers in his own, pulling his hand up to press a kiss to the back of it. Of course. Obito. Obito smiles, and this one isn't wry, or sad, or mocking. It's real, warm even if it's small, and he sits back. You'll have to help me cut my hair short, he tells Kasame. We are going to give the people here places to grow their own food. I can't have it in my face all the time. Terraforming, Kasame thinks, almost delighted, and has to laugh. But really, between Obito's Mokuden and his strength with Suiton, they are perfect for the job. And with a bit of economic help, maybe Suna won't be in such a desperate situation. It's not a method of saving the world he would have thought of himself, or ever considered before, but where they are now, it looks like a small gesture that could nevertheless help turn things around. And maybe, in the end, that's what the shinobi world needs. Not grand changes, but small ones. Differences that start with the people, where the means are more important than the end goal. My pleasure, he says cheerfully, and flips the kunai through his fingers as the shadows stretch long outside. It's a good place for a fresh start, he thinks, and smiles. Chapter 78, Monstrum. Monstrum, a man, st. From Latin, a sign or portent that disrupts the natural order as evidence of divine displeasure. The word monstrum is usually assumed to derive, as Cicero says, from the verb monstra, show, compare English, demonstrate, but according to Varro it comes from monia, warn. Because a sign must be startling or deviant to have an impact, monstrum came to mean unnatural event or a malfunctioning of nature. Suetonius mentioned that a monstrum is contrary to nature or exceeds the nature we are familiar with, like a snake with feet or a bird with 4 wings. The Greek equivalent was terrors. The English word monster derived from the negative sense of the word. Kurama. Kurama turns just as the door flies open, and he drops down onto one knee, catching the small body that comes flying at him. Naruto wraps his arms around his neck, clinging desperately, and Kurama lets out a long breath, sinking back on his heels and hugging Naruto tightly to him in return. Hey, kid, he says gently, burying his face in golden hair, and thinks I did it, I saved you. No more pain, no more Obito, no more Zetsu or Kaguya. He stopped that terrible future before it could happen, saved Naruto before he was even really in danger, and... it's good. It's amazing. He feels warm all through, right down to his bones, and the feeling doesn't seem like it's going away. Naruto pulls back to look up at him with wide blue eyes, and says sullenly, I'm glad you're okay, Kurama. Gaara said Shikaku couldn't feel you for a little while, so he started to get worried. Shit, right. Kamui uses a separate dimension, so of course the other Bijou wouldn't be able to feel his presence while he was there. Hopefully Shikaku didn't lose what sanity he has left fretting like the idiot he is. Where's Kurama starts to ask, but a small hand tugs on his sleeve, and without having to look he leans over and scoops Gaara up in his free arm, settling the little boy on his lap. There you are, Squirt. Everything okay? Gaara nods, though his eyes are a little wider than normal, and he tips forward to hide his face in Kurama's shirt. I'm okay, Fua, Kurama, he says, muffled but audible. Kurama chuckles, ruffling first crimson hair, then blonde. Yeah, I'm fine. No casualties except the bad guys, so we're good. On the hospital bed where Tsunade stuck him, complete with dire threats about what she would do to him if he left it, Kakashi makes a sound of protest, pushing up on one elbow to give Kurama a look that he probably learned from his Ninkan. How cruel, Kurama, forgetting my valiant sacrifices in the name of your safety. You're tired, asshole, not dying. Kurama rolls his eyes. Shut the hell up and sleep and you'll be fine. Kakashi huffs at him, but flops back down, wincing a little when the movement jars the 4 in his arm. I'm feeling hideously underappreciated, he tells the ceiling woefully. If only I had a hot redhead to cuddle me and feed me grapes. I'm sure it would help me get better much faster. Kurama, I can go get Rishi. Naruto volunteers brightly. He's got red hair and he's got that hot rock stuff. Lava, Gaara tries. Lava, Kurama corrects, ruffling Gaara's hair and hiding his growing grin. That he can spit, so he must be really hot all the time. Naruto finishes triumphantly. Kakashi groans, low and pained, and drags a pillow over his face. No thank you, he says, muffled. I think I just rediscovered my will to live on my own. Are you sure? Naruto asks, insistent. My will probably let you borrow him if you ask nicely. My huh? Kurama raises a brow, because that's not what he expected, even if it is massively amusing. With a snicker, he shifts, settling on the floor and crossing his legs under him as he leans back against the side of the bed. From above, there's a hum, a rustle, and then fingers sliding through his hair and rubbing lightly over the back of his neck. Kurama leans back into the touch a little, though all he says is, "Don't encourage the bastard, kid. He'll be fine." Okay. Naruto accepts that cheerfully, then grabs Kurama's hand, tugging on it. Kurama and can Sakura-chan come over and play? Can she have ramen with us? She's really cool. Apparently Team 7 is going to be getting an early start this time around, Kurama thinks, smiling, and it's a little bittersweet, but he thinks of his Naruto and Sakura, brother and sister, in every way that mattered, shoring each other up and giving their lives for the chance at a better world, and nothing in existence would make him say no. Of course, Kurama tells him, looping his arm around Naruto's waist and smiling down at him. I was planning to get some ramen after this. You going to come, right? Yeah. Naruto cheers and grabs Gaara's hand. Gaara, you gonna come too, right? We can find Sasuke and Sakura and Yujitone and Efne and everyone. We can all eat together and it'll be like a big family. Gaara smiles a little, looking up at Kurama and then back at Naruto. It is a big family, he says quietly, but doesn't protest when Naruto drags him up out of Kurama's lap and to his feet. I'll meet you there, Kurama promises when they both look back at him expectantly. He tweaks Naruto's nose, unable to fight a smile, and says gruffly, go on, go make trouble for someone else, okay? Naruto banes, throws himself back in to hug Kurama tightly, and cries, I love you, Kurama. I'm glad you're okay. Then is bolting out the door, running flat out with Gaara scampering to keep up, and Kurama chuckles as he watches them go. The fingers resting on the nape of his neck squeeze gently, then fall away, and Kakashi sits up. I could go for ramen, he says cheerfully, pulling his fore out and swinging his legs over the edge of the mattress. Kurama eyes him a little warily, then blows out a breath in an exasperated sigh and gets to his feet, hooking an arm under Kakashi's and tugging him fully upright. You realize the old hag is going to crush your skull like a melon, right? He asks. You'll just have to protect me, Kakashi tells him blithely, and to his credit he's mostly standing under his own power, even if he isn't quite as steady as normal. From Senjutsu Nade. Kurama demands, and he takes a step back, watching warily as Kakashi balances on his own. Fuck that, I'd rather face Setsu again. Kakashi pauses, considering, and then winces a little. Fair enough. No power on earth could keep Kurama from rolling his eyes at that. And you're still going to test her temper, he demands, following Kakashi's mostly steady steps out of the hospital room. You're a moron. You'll just have to do something nice for me before I die, Kakashi tells him, as innocent as a summer sky. Sage, Kurama hates his stupid face. He's just about to open his mouth and tell Kakashi that when there's a commotion at the far end of the hall. Kotetsu and Azumarill are shouting for assistance, staggering into the ward with a body slumped between them. Kurama stiffens, the smell of drying blood almost overwhelming, and takes a step back as a familiar figure bolts out of one of the neighboring rooms. Tsunade gasps out a strangled, "Sensei," and then she's moving, flying down the hall with her hands already starting to glow green. She presses her fingers to Sarutobi's chest, relief immediately suffusing her form, and orders sharply, get him on a bed. You, find Shizune and send her here. What happened? We found him in the forest while we were doing a sweep for enemies, Kotetsu says, helping Azuma maneuver the Sandaime onto a stretcher. Dan's was there too, it looks like they were fighting, and Sarutobi-sama must have killed him. He's, really dead. Tsunade goes still, and Kurama can't quite see her face, but the line of her back is stiff. Shumo Dan's, she asks. Kotetsu blinks, and he and Azuma share a confused look. Yes, Azuma says after a moment. A shaky breath, and then Tsunade nods. His chakra system has been overloaded, she says, dragging herself back to the task at hand. And his heart is failing. I can save him, but he's going to be recovering for a long time. Find Kushina, she's going to need to take up her duties sooner than expected. And get word to the clan heads, she'll need their support with the other cage. Right away, Tsunade-sama. Kotetsu vanishes out the nearest window in a blur and Izumo heads down the hall at a run. Kurama flicks a glance at Tsurutobi, still and pale and bloody against the sheets, and then slips into the room behind him. Kakashi is already there, lounging cattily against the wall like he isn't hiding from the woman outside, and from the bed Hayate is giving him a wary look. She's distracted, asshole, Kurama tells Kakashi, mostly amused. Tsurutobi will definitely live, which is more than I can say for you. Relief bleeds into the line of Kakashi's shoulders, but he tips his nose up and says airily, I wasn't worried. Tsunade-sama is the best. Which is why you're running away from her, Kurama retorts, but he drags the window open and leans out. Open street beneath them, even if it's a little busy, and that's good enough for him. It's a shinobi village, anyway, people are used to shinobi dropping out of the sky anywhere and everywhere. You going to die of pneumonia if I leave the window open, he asks Hayate. The Takuto flashes a little, but he doesn't cough. It's fine. I'm only in here for some follow-up tests, he says. Kakashi, you look as blindingly handsome as always. Kakashi cuts in, beaming his bullshit smile. Thank you, I think Kurama agrees. Kurama huffs. No, I don't agree. You look like a half-price zombie without the common sense to just die, he retorts. Maybe you should have just stayed in bed like you were supposed to. Because isn't bastard, Kakashi just hums, politely skeptical. You're the one who couldn't keep your hands off of me, he points out. That kiss on the wall. Shut up and jump out the window. Kurama gives him a pointed shove, waves absently to Hayate, and follows Kakashi down to the street. There's no one around who will immediately run to Tsunade and report Kakashi's jailbreak, thankfully, and Kurama turns towards Ichiraka, tugging his rather tattered shirt a little more closely around him. It's a lost cause, scorched and stained, but it's still winter and better than nothing. You're very hard on clothes, aren't you? Kakashi muses, eyeing him sidelong. It almost makes me wonder why you bother with a shirt at all. Because it's cold, Kurama retorts, glaring at him. And you don't get to talk. You're the one who destroyed my first set of new clothes, you know. Kakashi winces faintly. I could go an entire lifetime without remembering that I stabbed you with a kaidori, thanks. Given what other memories that must bring up, Kurama doesn't blame him. I gave you a concussion in return, didn't I? That makes us even. It's pretty much the same if you count how fast I heal. Judging by the expression Kakashi is wearing, that wasn't quite as reassuring as Kurama intended it to be. With a sigh, he reaches over, catching Kakashi's wrist and then sliding his hand down to interlock their fingers. And yeah, okay, he could get used to this hand-holding thing. Even if it is bullshit that he had to suffer through far too much of with Naruto and Sasuke the first time around. Kakashi gives him a mildly startled glance, then makes a sound of amusement, curling his fingers over Kurama's hand. You're adorable, he says, like it's a revelation. Fuck you. Kurama retorts instantly, bristling. He goes to yank his hand away, but Kakashi doesn't let go, and it may be he doesn't try as hard as he conceivably could. I am not fucking, I'm a son of the sage and a monster of mortal nightmare, you fucker. You should give in and accept it, Kakashi advises him breezily. It will be much less painful in the long, bastard, Kurama mutters, removing his elbow from Kakashi's ribs. There's a light chuckle from behind them, and Kurama turns sharply, pulling Kakashi with him. For one wretched heartbeat he thinks it's Kasame, but of course it's not. It's Raid, smiling at them, with two familiar shapes half hidden behind him. You two look friendly, for a shinobi and a monster of mortal nightmare, he says, casting a glance at their hands, but it's said kindly, and his happiness looks genuine. The slant of his mouth when he looks up at Kurama is only faintly cautious, weighted far more towards friendly, and Kurama doesn't know if it's because he tried to save Genma or because Kakashi accepts him, but either way he's grateful. We get by, Kakashi drawls, still rubbing his ribs like the overdramatic as he is. Kurama hadn't hit him that hard. I thought you'd be with Genma. Raid waves a hand at the small bodies behind him. I was, but since everything's over with I had to get the kids. They want to see Genma too. Sai leans around Raid just enough to wave solemnly at Kurama, while Shin regards them with sharp, careful eyes for a moment before he nods. Hey, Kurama says, crouching down to meet their eyes, and it's still a fate ache, the memory of the Sai from the future, another friend who died for his friends, but it's offset by the fact that Dan's is dead and Shin is alive. Things are a hell of a lot better now than they ever were before. You two picked a pretty brave guy to tack along with. Gunma's a good shinobi. Sai looks at Shin for a moment, then back at Kurama. He faced Dan Sama alone, he says, like this is the highest mark of bravery he can imagine. And Raid said we could stay even though Dan Sama is gone now. Raid flashes a little, rubbing a hand over his hair. Gunma would put me out on my ass if I didn't, he says, chuckling. And he'd keep you two instead. I like it better this way. Gunma wouldn't do that, Shin informs him, faith absolute. He loves you too. You are his weakness. If you were killed he would be vulnerable. And there's the creepy factor coming out, Kurama thinks, rolling his eyes. Raid is clearly at a loss for words, not entirely sure what to say to that, so Kurama offers, next time leave off the last part, kid. Most people don't advertise the fact that they think in logistics and leverage. Shin blinks, looking faintly bewildered. Oh. I'm sorry. That, at least, makes Raid smile and shake his head. He pats Shin's shoulder reassuringly, pushing lightly to steer him towards the hospital. No harm done, don't worry. We'll work on it. Come on, Gunma's waiting and is only patient when he wants to be. Kakashi hums quietly, watching the three of them disappear through the main doors. Ten's lucky he got out, he says. Lucky that you convinced him to get out, Kurama corrects, and when Kakashi shoots him a startled look, he just shrugs, turning towards Ichiraku again. He used to talk about it to Naruto, to help him deal with Sai. Last time around, there wasn't a Gunma to snatch them up. Kakashi winces a little, but there's humor leaching back into his tone when he says, I don't think you have any right to talk about child snatching, Kurama. Fuck you, Kurama grumbles, but can't really bring himself to mean it. I didn't snatch them, for the most part they came to me. Millimeter, Kakashi sounds far too amused, and he catches Kurama's elbow when it comes in for a second hit. There's a pause, and then he asks, without ever quite looking at Kurama, and now what? What the hell do you mean? Kurama asks, confused. Kakashi's gaze is very determinedly on the end of the street. You've gotten rid of Akatsuki, taken care of Obita, seen Zetsu defeat it. There's no threat to the Jinchuriki anymore. Half a second more and Kurama gets it. No threat from Akatsuki, he corrects, and comes to a stop, pulling Kakashi round. He meets one visible gray eye as steadily as he can, and says, they are Jinchuriki. Opportunistic idiots are always going to think they're a good target. And besides, I just got settled here, asshole. What makes you think I'd leave Konoha? There's nothing up there for me. Everything I want is right here. Kakashi stares at him, wide-eyed and silent, and then takes a breath. His eyes falls closed for a long moment before he lets out a quiet huff that's almost a laugh and says, and you said I can't call you adorable. Kurama kicks him in the shin, though not as hard as he could. Shut the hell up, bastard. I never said I wanted you. Kakashi chuckles, but he tightens his grip on Kurama's hand, pulls him close and lets their shoulders bump. That's true, he agrees. But it's simple oversight, I'm sure. At the very least, you never said you didn't. With a roll of his eyes, Kurama pulls him forward again. Whatever makes you feel better about yourself, bastard. The Kokkinen opens his mouth to answer, but before he can get so much as a word out, there's a flare of orange gold wings and F drops from the sky practically on top of them, hooking her arms around Kurama's neck and making him yelp and stagger as her full weight hits in. Gay. Sage, damn it, sweetheart. Sorry, Kurama and I. She doesn't sound it in the least, but she's grinning, wide and bright as Yujiro slips out of an alley to loop her fingers into the hem of Kurama's shirt. Leaning over, eyes Kakashi and Kurama's linked hands with interest. Oh, this is new. Why didn't you tell us you were dating the Kokkinen, Kurama and I? Kurama snorts, but he shifts so she can lock her knees around his sides a little more easily. Because I wanted to at least get him into bed before he brats chased him off. Kakashi chokes. Or, F moans, leaning forward to give Kurama a look that's 80% wounded eyes and 20% bloodthirsty mischief. We wouldn't do that, Kurama and I. He's not Shisui, you know. Fate the sage, Kurama mutters, then raises his voice again. Pause off. You can torture Shisui all you want, but this one's mine to torment. Yujiro giggles, leaning into him, even as F makes very sad, very despondent noises over his shoulder. My hero, Kakashi says, dry as dust. You can thank me later, Kurama tells him sweetly. Kakashi opens his mouth instantly, retort ready, before his gaze falls on FS grin and Yujido's knife-sharp smile as they both stare at him. He swallows and closes it again determinedly. Well, at least they are having fun, Kurama thinks with a snort. He taps a claw against FS kneecap and asks, you two are okay? I heard Sazori hit the academy. We are fine, Yujido says immediately. Yudakada and the Jounin commander took care of him. And the boy Yudakada has a crush on helped them, too. Yeah. F says cheerfully, throwing her weight forward and half over Kurama's shoulder and ignoring how it makes him stagger. He's kinda cute, and I'm pretty sure he likes Yudakada back. Naruto went to find them, Yujido adds. He thought they might want ramen, too. Kurama hums. He'd seen Yudakada on his way out of the hospital when he was dragging Kakashi in, and the Kurinin had been politely obstinate about leaving, much to Tsunade's ire. He'd seemed fine, and clearly been on his way to find someone, so Kurama had thrown Kakashi at her as a distraction. Good, he decides. Rishi and Han. With the lava lady, F says, and with a twist she flips over Kurama's shoulder, lands lightly in the straight, and then spins around to grab Yujido's free hand, swinging it happily. They were helping the barrier squads, I think. And Karen went with them because she wanted to see them too. Which is pretty much everyone accounted for, Kurama thinks with faint satisfaction. Akatsuki hadn't had enough members to do much damage, even Nagata and Conan had bolted before they caused more than a few blocks worth of destruction, and the one big battlefield from the miniature invasion is the new stretch of jungle right outside the walls. It's a hell of a lot better than the last Akatsuki invasion Kurama witnessed. Good, he says again, reaching out to smooth down blonde hair and then ruffle grain. You two did great, you know. I heard you got everyone out of harm's way. That was quick thinking. Yujido smiles, quietly pleased, and a grip on Kurama's shirt tightens just a little. I think the class likes us now, she says, almost wondering. Iga said we could spar with her whenever she's free, too. It's all too easy, sometimes, to remember that the Jinchuriki have spent an entire lifetime apart, never accepted, simply because of what other people made them. Right now, looking at Yujido's hopeful face, the light in FS eyes, all Kurama can see is wonder, and it aches in his chest a little, though he can't tell if it's in a good or a bad way. Maybe she'll be able to keep you brats out of trouble, Kurama huffs and rolls his eyes when two pouts with varying degrees of severity are leveled at him. Yujido's still mostly unpracticed at the expression, but F must have been taking lessons from Naruto. Yeah. Why don't you go save some seats for me and the half-price zombie over here? Ma, Kakashi protests mildly, even though his eye is crinkling with humor. Half price? Does that mean you bought him, Kurama? F asks, mischief in her smile. You know you can't return discount stuff. Kakashi chuckles, twisting his fingers further around Kurama's. See? Now you're obligated to stay and look after me. I didn't buy you, Kurama retorts. No one in their right minds would pay money for you, asshole. Does that mean you stole him, like he stole us? FS expression is perfectly innocent, which means the question is anything but. Growling, Kurama swats at her, and she skips out of the way with a laugh. Go, he orders. Be a brat somewhere else. With a bright giggle, F darts in, wrapping her arms around his waist and hugging him tightly before she dances away, tagging Yujido with her. Naruto, she shouts, just as a blonde head rounds the corner. Naruto, Kurama is dating Kakashi. Say it a little louder, why don't you, Kurama grumbles. I think a couple people in T country might have missed that. F beams at him, then takes a running leap, hits the side of the building in front of them, and launches herself higher into the air. Chakra sparks, and with a whoop she flips over, orange gold wings blooming. She swoops down, catching Yujido's outstretched hands, and pulls the other girl up into the air with her before they soar away. Chmea's created a monster, Kurama says with amusement. I think FS going to forget how to walk before she's 20 at this rate. Kakashi chuckles lightly, but lets go of Kurama's hand so that Kurama can catch the two small bodies that come flying at him, though Sakura and Sasuke are slightly more reserved. You dating, Kurama and I. Naruto cries, clinging to his shirt, while Gaara takes hold of several hanks of red hair and settles against his shoulder like a hurricane wouldn't budge in. You dating the Freak Squad guy? Ma, I have a name, Kakashi objects. A famous name, even. Does that make Shisui family too? Gaara asks, sounding like he's not entirely sure about the idea. He can be the obnoxious pet, Kurama proposes, smirking. Kakashi eyes him, then snorts softly. He might even agree to that if you stop threatening to eat him. If I ate a Uchiha, I'd probably get indigestion. Kurama makes a face, lets Naruto ripple down from his grasp, and sidesteps him neatly when he almost bolts underfoot. Ramen. Naruto cheers, catching Sasuke's hand. Come on. Let's beat Fne there. We can't beat someone who can fly, Sasuke protests, but he breaks into a run nevertheless, letting Naruto pull him into a side street for a shortcut. Kurama snorts quietly, watching them disappear behind a fall of flowering vines, and then glances down at the 6-year-old still walking with them. Not in the mood to run, he asked Sakura. After a moment of hesitation, she shakes her head. I'm okay walking. Is it really okay if I come, too? Right. This Sakura has Ino and no one else, with too many bullies and not enough confidence to fill a thimble. Of course it is. Naruto invited you, didn't he? He wouldn't do that if he didn't mean it, he says, looking down at Gaara, who's suddenly looking back. Wide aquamarine eyes blink, and then Gaara says very firmly, I want to walk with Sakura. Good choice, Kurama almost says, but decides to let the two of them sort out a friendship all on their own. Crouching down, he sets Gaara on his feet, and the redhead stumbles a step before he latches onto Sakura's sleeve. You can sit with me when we eat, he says determinedly. Sakura blinks at him, eyes wide, and looks down at her hands. For a moment Kurama almost thinks she's about to cry, but when she looks up, there's no trace of tears. She's beaming instead, bright and happy and thankful, and she says, thank you, like it's everything she ever wanted just handed to her. Damn these kids, Kurama thinks with an inward groan. Naruto is definitely laughing his ass off in the Pure Land, fuck it all. On his left, Kakashi chuckles softly, taking his hand again and dreading his thumb over Kurama's knuckles as they start walking. Another one, he asks, amused, and when Kurama growls half-heartedly at him he just offers up the beaming, bullshit smile Kurama will never admit he wears well. Ma, it's an honest question. If I'm going to be around I want to know which children to dodge first. The Jinchuriki, Kurama informs him, without hesitation. Unless you want to end up wearing your ass for a hat. They are good kids, just over-enthusiastic. They are each capable of leveling a village with a temper tantrum, Kakashi corrects blandly, though the way his eyes crinkled shows he's fighting a smile. I was an over-enthusiastic child. They are ridiculous. Monsters. Kurama shrugs, looking away, because it's true. He's never denied it, not for himself or the Jinchuriki. They have power enough to terrify everyone around them, and they are learning that they don't have to be scared of themselves. Pretty soon, nothing and no one is going to be able to stop them, and honestly, Kurama looks forward to the day when everyone else realizes that. Kakashi's humor doesn't waver, though by all rights it should. If that's the case, I picked the prettiest monster of all. Kurama scoffs, but he curls his fingers a little more tightly for Kakashi's. Even after what happened. There's a quiet hum. You're going to have to be more specific. A lot has happened in the last few weeks. When Kurama levels a look at him, unamused, he raises his free hand in surrender. Even after you turning back into a 20-story fox and attempting to eat me and 3 of my friends. Yes. Turning back, he said. Not turning into, not becoming, but back. Because he knows what Kurama used to be, knows what's still lurking right under his skin, and even so, his answer is still yes. You seem to be forgetting that I kissed you first, Kurama manages and pretends there isn't the faintest waver in his voice. If anyone did the picking, it's me. Kakashi pauses, looking at him for a long moment, and then tips his head a little, the smile clear even though it's covered by the mask. And? Are you happy with the monster you picked? Sage, this man. Stopping short, Kurama uses his grip on Kakashi to pull him around, to look at him where he has no choice but to see it. To see the way Kurama looks at him, the expression on his face, the way every emotion is written out. Monster, he repeats. Kakashi smiles again, a small, crooked thing. Box up that part of yourself, wipe off the blood, paste on a smile, and no one will ever know anything's happened. Do it in reverse and the monster is all that's left. I've lived that way for a long time, Kurama. Kurama takes a breath, and it's fine. It is. There's one way forward from here, and they are both going to walk that path. Together, even, and it isn't something Kurama had thought to want, but he does. Yeah, he says, and meets Kakashi's eyes without wavering, without a hint of hesitation. I'm happy. The monster I picked is fucking perfect for me, and if anyone says otherwise, I'll kick their teeth in. You included. Kakashi yanks his mask down, stepping in and kissing Kurama hard, hands in his hair and mouth hard and desperate. Kurama surges up into it, kissing back, returning every ounce of fierceness twofold. It's a kiss like a storm breaking, scattering lightning across Kurama's nerves and curling through his veins with hurricane winds to leave him breathless and dazed. You, Kakashi says against his lips and kisses him again, short and hungry. You going to kill me, Kurama? Kurama laughs, hooking his fingers in Kakashi's pants pockets and tugging him even closer until their chests are pressed together. But what a way to go, he murmurs, and Kakashi's breath audibly catches. Kurama and I. Kurama and I, come on. Ramen. Naruto wails and they break apart, Kakashi's sound of disappointment clear. If you don't hurry up, me and Karen are gonna eat all of it. Not an idle threat, coming from Uzumaki, Kakashi murmurs, tucking his mask back up with a faintly rueful smile. He drags his fingers through Kurama's hair before he lets go completely, and Kurama shivers a little at the feeling, then leans in. He kisses Kakashi through the mask, quick and filthy, and turns away. Hang on, brat, we are coming, he calls and tugs Kakashi along as he heads towards where Naruto is waiting. Chapter 79, Leaf. Leaf LF, as happily, as gladly, willingly, willing, desirous, dear, beloved, treasured. From Middle English leaf, Old English luff, cognate with Dutch leaf, German lieb, Old Norse Eljuffer, Gothic liefs, akin to love. Kushina shows up halfway through lunch with no explanation beyond an Uzumaki's sixth sense for ramen, which, Kurama supposes, is explanation enough. She's wearing the topmost layer of the Hokage robes without the hat, red hair pulled up in a high tail and sword still over her back, scratched and bruised but cheerful even sir. With a friendly grin at Tucha, she slides into the seat on Kakashi's right, then promptly steals Kurama's bowl. Hey! Kurama snaps, even though he's already waving for Tucha to bring him another one. Too slow, little brother. Kushina taunts and promptly stuffs as many noodles in her mouth as will fit. It's a lot of noodles. Kurama sees many, many big-mouthed jerks in her future. I own that, he protests, but Kushina just grins, all teeth, and he has to roll his eyes, unwilling to be soothed by the stroke of Kakashi's thumb against his thigh. Fucking tomato. Mouth still full, Kushina flips him off, spends a few seconds struggling to swallow her bite, and retorts, I'm the Hokage, show some respect. Officially. Yujiro asks, raising her head from whatever destructive plot she and F are giggling over. Are they going to have a ceremony? Probably not. Kakashi is the one who answers, and there's a faint, wry slight to his smile, though his hand doesn't move from where it's cold over Kurama's leg. When the Hokage changes during a time of conflict, there isn't usually a celebration. Though since Tsurutobi is still alive, they might change that. The stubborn old bastard will be fine, Kushina says firmly, then leans around Kakashi to wave at the street. Yugura. And oh. The tone of that makes Kurama look up from his new bowl of ramen, and his eyes immediately narrow at the sight of who is approaching. Not just Yugura, who has stripped off his Mizukage robes and all signs of office, including his Hatayate, but the Keisuke-jan. Oh indeed, Kurama thinks, eyeing the blonde girl clinging to Rosa's hand, the dark-haired boy half hidden behind him. Gaara, one chair down on Naruto's far side, makes a startled, almost scared sound, and glances at Kurama like he's judging the best path over to his lap. Thankfully, Rosa stops at the very edge of their group, next to Kushina, and doesn't try to come any closer. Uzumaki, he says with a polite nod, and gently extracts his fingers from Temari's grasp. Why don't you two go say hello while I speak with Uzumaki, he tells his children, and Kurama feels his brows rise. That wasn't what he was expecting. All right, Temari says, all fierce determination, and she grabs Kankura by the sleeve, towing him over towards Gaara. On Gaara's other side, leans in to smile at them, and Naruto waves cheerfully. Gaara looks between his two fellow Jinchuriki, then at his siblings, and visibly steels himself before he offers a tentative smile. Temari's steps falter, just a little, and her eyes widen, but then she smiles back, bright and relieved. Deciding that they'll be fine, Kurama shifts his attention back to Rosa, turning around on his stool and leaning back against the counter to level the case gauge with an entirely unimpressed look. If you think a few minutes of making nice with his siblings is going to be enough to get Gaara to go back to Suna with you, he starts, a clear warning in his tone. Rosa raises a hand, expression tired, and shakes his head. Believe me, Uzumaki, that's the last thing on my mind. He reaches into his robes and pulls out a sheaf of folded papers and a pen, offering both to Kurama. When Kurama hesitates warily, he snorts softly and says, "Go ahead." They are adoption papers. I'm formally waiving my rights as Gaara's father. Suna isn't the place for him, but it seems as if he's found a place of his own regardless. A little stunned, Kurama takes the papers, then opens them and checks them over. It's the truth, they really are adoption papers, already bearing Rosa's signature and stamp, just waiting for Kurama's own. When he glances up, faintly incredulous, Rosa just shakes his head again. I would have asked Gaara's opinion, but I believe he already made that clear, he says quietly. And despite the fact that I caused it, I didn't want to look into my son's face and watch him choose someone else. One more moment of cowardice, I'm afraid. There's a cutting answer on the tip of Kurama's tongue, but, well, this is a decent peace offering, as long as Gaara never has to set foot in Suna until they realize he's more than the monster they made him into. Instead, he bites the words back, adds his own signature to the line, and hands one set of papers back to Rosa. Thanks, he says gruffly, because Rosa could easily have been far more of an asshole about this, but for the first time he put Gaara's welfare over his value as a Jinchuriki, and since he'll be out of their lives shortly, Kurama can take that as something of a bridge being mended. Rosa's expression is rueful beneath the shadow of his hat, but he inclines his head and steps away. Temari, Kankura, be back at the inn before dinner time, he says sternly. Yes, father, Temari agrees, then hesitates, looking from Rosa to Gaara. We can stay for a little while. If you'd like, Rosa agrees. He stares at Gaara for a long moment, regret and resignation foremost on his face, then turns away. Goodbye, Gaara, he says, and without waiting for a response he pushes through the hangings and heads back the way he came, leaving Baki to linger a few stalls down, one eye on Kankuro and Temari. Gaara watches him go, eyes wide, but a moment later Naruto tugs on his sleeve and he turns back, a smile breaking over his face again. Sasuke and Sakura are leaning in as well, with Naruto chattering cheerfully at Temari and Kankura, and despite the way Gaara's siblings are still a little tense, a little further from Gaara than is really necessary, they don't look actively scared, so that's probably an improvement. Well, Kurama thinks, folding the adoption papers and running a finger along the creases. That was a hell of a lot less explosive than he'd expected any meeting about Gaara's future to be. So now you're officially a father, Kakashi says mildly, and when Kurama turns back around to finish his meal, their thighs brush. Kakashi doesn't move away, just smiles at him. 1 down, 3 to go. Or is it 7? Kushina scoffs. He can be Naruto's uncle, but is stealing my son over my dead body, you know, she declares, jabbing her chopsticks at Kurama threateningly. Like I'd need to steal him, Kurama retorts. He'd come with me willingly. He would not, and I'm his mother. So. Yugura makes a sound of mixed impatience and amusement, and asked pointedly, is there room for one more? Still scowling at Kushina, Kurama jerks a thumb at the stool on her other side. Yeah, sure, but you have to sit next to the harpy. I think I'll risk it, Yugura says, dry as dust, and pulls himself up onto the seat. One of your tonkotsu, please, he tells Tucha. Of course, Mizuki-sama, Tucha says easily. It's just Yugura, he corrects, and Kurama blinks, because Yugura is about 50% defensive anger over his age and 50% pride in his position. Raising a brow, he leans around Kakashi to level a look at the Jinchuriki, and Yugura rolls his eyes faintly in return. Terum will be carrying the hat back to Kuri when the delegation returns, he says. I told her that she and the mocha could wrestle for who got to wear it, but I believe Momocha bowed out almost immediately. Faced with Terumai and the Mizukage seed in question, Kurama doesn't blame Zabuza for staging a tactical retreat. Mai's probably overjoyed, and Kurama remembers enough about what kind of Mizukage she was to be glad she's back in a position. Kuri needs change, and given the way Obito controlled him, Yugura isn't the best person to implement it. There's always going to be some level of doubt about where Obito's control ended and Yugura began, but Mai's one of the people who stepped up to stop him. People will follow her gladly. So when you ask if we've got room for one more, Kurama starts, amused. Yugura gives him a look, but concedes with a tip of his head. I was hoping you wouldn't object to one more Jinchuriki occupying your house, and that the Hokage would allow me to stay in Konohara while longer. That's fine. Kushina tells him cheerfully, through another mouthful of noodles. She swallows and adds, there are still a bunch of extra rooms, so just pick whichever one you want. Downing the last of her bowl, she checks the time and pushes to her feet. Okay. Time to go tell the council they'd better keep their damn noses out of things if they don't want me to kick them out on their asses. I'm not as nice as Minato was, you know. She's really not, and knowing how Honyura and Udatane supported everything Dance did, Kurama really can't think of better people to aim her at. He grins, showing teeth, and says, don't get blood on those robes. It'll be a bitch to scrub out. Kushina laughs, gives him a cheeky salute, and drops some money on the counter before she waves a cheerful goodbye to all of them and disappears down the street. Leaning into Kurama's shoulder a little, Kakashi chuckles. His fingers leave off tracing lines of heat across the inside of Kurama's thigh, and he slides his hand down Kurama's arm to lace their fingers together before he asks a little whimsically, plans for the rest of the day. I can keep an eye on the children, Yugura proposes before Kurama can even open his mouth. Catching the raised brow Kurama gives him, he levels a look of amusement right back. Everyone else has done their time, and seeing as I'm not Mizukage anymore, I don't have anything else to do. Maybe we can play tag again. Kurama laughs, leaning back a little to survey the 4 Jinchuriki and 4 shinobi children where they are all starting to huddle. Plans are being made, he's sure of it, but is also sure he's probably better off being able to claim ignorance, so he doesn't listen in. Yeah, if you want, but I think they're coming up with ways to keep themselves occupied. Good luck. Yugura smiles, lavender eyes a little softer than Kurama has seen them before. I'm a Jinchuriki as well, in case you've forgotten, he says, but there's no heat in the words. Every urge they have to make their presence obvious and impossible to ignore, I assure you, I've had the same. Yeah, Kurama is more than willing to believe that. Yugura probably didn't have much choice, either, when it came to having Isaburu sealed in him. In fact, Kurama can't think of a single Jinchuriki who asked to be one. Even Mido made the decision because it was either that or watch Hashirama get his head ripped off, trying to fight both Madara and Kurama at the same time. Well, maybe the next generation will do better after seeing what Jinchuriki can be. Or maybe they'll let the Bijou out at the end of their lives, set them free and let things go back to how they should be. Have fun, Kurama tells him, and gets a lofty smirk in response. Oh yeah, Yugura is definitely going to be taking advantage of the newfound freedom of being just another shinobi. Kurama wishes him the best of luck. Turning back to Kakashi, he leans in, freehand tracing a line up the man's thigh, and nips lightly at the curve of his ear. No plans, he says, practically against the skin, and feels the shiver that rocks Kakashi's entire body. I might be able to come up with a few, Kakashi manages after a moment, and casts a sideways glance at Kurama. He raises their hands to his mouth, and through the mask Kurama can just feel the edge of teeth as he nips at Kurama's fingers, then drags his lips down them. Fuck, Kurama thinks, and his breath shouldn't catch at that simple gesture, but it does. Going to swim again, he asks, and despite his best efforts it's rough and a little hoarse. Kakashi chuckles, expression faintly wicked as he presses his mouth to the pulse point of Kurama's wrist. Maybe I'm just planning to have you do all the work. Okay, that's just about all the teasing Kurama can stand. He pushes to his feet, pulling Kakashi with him, and nods to an amused-looking Yugura. A hesitation, but he doesn't want Naruto to worry, so he sidesteps Temari and Kankuro and leans into musk-golden hair. Hey, kid, be good for Yugura, okay? Okay, Kurama and I. Naruto says cheerfully. Are you taking Kakashi back to the hospital? No, I'm going to take him home and put him to bed, Kurama answers, which is probably technically the truth. At least, he hopes there will be a bed in the near future. If they don't get that far today, he doesn't mind, but it would be nice. Squirt, you good? I'm fine, Gaara says with certainty, and judging by the way he doesn't seem to mind Temari at his elbow, he's telling the truth. Of course, it probably helps that Naruto is pressed close on one side, with Sakura tight on the other, and Sasuke at their backs. Kurama kisses him on the forehead, tweaks Naruto's nose, and waves at F and Yujiro, who are just out of reach. Behave. No eating anyone, okay, brats. We'll try our best. F promises, though by her grin she means it about as much as Kakashi would have promised to give up his pawn. Yujiro nods, too, and her lips are curled in a small but cat's-mark smile that means the lack of verbal agreement was absolutely deliberate. Kurama just rolls his eyes at the two of them, leaves money to cover all of their meals where Tsuchi can reach it, and joins Kakashi outside the stand instantly. An arm winds around his waist, pulling him close, and Kakashi drags him into a deep, careful kiss. It draws a low, hungry sound up from Kurama's chest, and he hooks his fingers into Kakashi's pockets, kissing back as deeply as he can. Behind them, inside the stall, there's the sound of laughter, Naruto and F talking loudly, undercut with Yujiro and Gaara and Sasuke. Sakura is laughing, and F is giggling, and Naruto's presence is bright and steady and unwavering. It makes the breath catch in Kurama's throat, makes him lean into Kakashi more, kiss him harder, because, well, he feels good all the way down to his bones. He'd been a creature of malice and rage and hatred for so long, with nothing else, and his Naruto helped turn him from that path, pull him towards a brighter future. But Kurama had to reach that future on his own, by himself, with one final push from his best friend, and now he has. None of this would have happened if he had stayed a ghost of chakra trapped in someone else's soul, and for all the grief that came before, Kurama is happy. He can't remember ever being this happy before. Kakashi eases the kiss down, scales it back until he's just slanting his lips over Kurama's, dragging them to the side to press a careful kiss to the edge of his mouth, and then whispers against his skin, "So where are we going? If you try Shunshin you're going to crash us into a wall or something." Kurama huffs and dredges up the memory of Kushina using one. It's still clear, simple enough, and Kurama takes a breath. Kakashi catches his chin with one hand, kisses him again with the curve of a smile all too easy to feel this close, and says, "My apartment is 2 blocks away. I can manage that far." There's no time to protest before a whirl of leaves spins them away, and an instant later they are landing on a narrow windowsill 3 floors up, with a quieter street below them. Kakashi flares his chakra and then slides the window open, tugging Kurama through into a small bedroom. Still fully conscious, Kurama mocks and Kakashi growls softly, kisses him hard, and pulls him down. They sprawl on the bed, half collapsed against the pillows with Kurama partway on top, and Kakashi steals the laughter right from Kurama's mouth. Long fingers cup Kurama's face, and it feels a little like that kiss under the Hokage mountain, full of desperation and affection, traced through with relief. He breaks apart just enough for words, curls his hands in silver hair and leans in to press his lips to Kakashi's eyelid, his forehead, his cheek. "Hey," he says into the heat between them, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Kakashi looks up at him for a long moment, then carefully pushes his Hataide up to look at Kurama with both eyes. He holds his gaze, and Kurama doesn't want to flinch away. There's no urge, no hesitation. He knows that Iron knows what it can do, just faced the horror of it a few hours ago at most, but this is Kakashi. This is the man who came to him the moment the Jinjutsu broke, who defended him against Setsu and Obada and Kasame alike. He's the one person in this time who knows everything Kurama is. They've pushed at each other, snarked and snarled and fought and come to an understanding, and Kurama couldn't think of him as an enemy anymore if he tried. It's freeing in a way he doesn't remember ever feeling before. Not freed from someone else's chains, but from chains of his own creation. No more fear. Not of Kakashi or anything about him. Leaning down, he kisses that eyelid as well, the scar that cost Kakashi his original eye, the curve of Kakashi's smile as he pulls Kurama in again. One hand strokes down Kurama's side to curl around the back of his thigh, squeezing lightly, and Kakashi sighs into the kiss. "I guess you're not," he says, and the words are halfway to jerk, but the look in his eyes is the furthest thing from it. "There goes my grand plan to get rid of you and reclaim my peaceful life." Kurama scoffs. "Bullshit, asshole. You just like pushing boundaries. But he kisses Kakashi again anyway, nips lightly at his tongue for the way it makes Kakashi's hand tighten on his leg, and shifts until he has a leg on either side of Kakashi's hips before he pushes up. Kakashi blinks up at him, rumpled and flushed with his mouth kiss bruised, and the side of him makes heat curl around Kurama's bones. He unzips the heavy flak jacket, gets his hands under Kakashi's shirt and pushes up to run his fingers over tight muscles. Kakashi's breath catches, eyes going heavy-lidded as he watches Kurama ease the fabric up even further, and he asks lightly, "Do you want to fuck me?" Kurama can't stop the way his grip tightens at that, the unconscious roll of his hips as his claws tear through cloth, and he growls softly, lurching forward to kiss Kakashi roughly. Yeah, he admits, and it's hardly recognizable as a word, shaped around the edges of a snarl. He takes a breath, drags himself back under control, and tries to shake off the heat that's building inside of him. That kiss had more teeth than normal, and he knows his own limits well enough to recognize that. I'm bleeding chakra right now, pulling it in from around us. My reserves are so low that it's instinct. If my strength gets out of hand, things could get messy. There's a quiet hum, like Kakashi finds this interesting but ultimately trivial information. I trust you, he says easily, the warmth in his eyes is softer than Kurama knows what to do with. Sage, Kurama wants him badly. He growls, kisses Kakashi again, short and desperate, and presses his mouth to skin to admit, "I'm not going to last long." Kakashi chuckles, and the hand around his thigh slides up to cup his ass. That's all right, he assures Kurama, and his expression is full of mischief and naked desire in equal measure. "Once you're done with me, I get you." The thought shivers down Kurama's spine, and he groans, rocking back on instinct. The thought of fucking Kakashi until he comes, then rolling over and letting Kakashi have him while he's loose and sated, is way too fucking sexy. He wants it with an ache that twists through him, makes breathing difficult and his blood hot. Fuck yes, he manages and ducks to press his mouth against Kakashi's stomach, scraping lightly with his claws. "You going to have to get yourself ready," he says, a little regretfully, as he eyes the sharp tips to his nails. Maybe he'll file them down, at least on one hand, if this ends up being something regular. Kakashi chuckles, tugging him up to taste his mouth, deep and heady enough to make Kurama's head go fuzzy. "I'm sure you can entertain yourself while I do, Kurama," he breathes, taking one of Kurama's lips between his own and scraping lightly with his teeth. Kurama hums agreeably, finding the button on Kakashi's pants. "I might be able to come up with a few things." He undoes the zipper, then pushes them down, sliding with them until he can pull Kakashi's sandals off and relieve him of his pants completely. It leaves him at eye level with the coved cock straining Kakashi's underwear, and with a hum of interest he leans forward to mouth at it. Kakashi makes a bitten-off sound, hips bucking up in an aborted jerk, and his hand fists in Kurama's hair. "If you do too much of that," he warns, "this is going to be over a lot sooner than planned." "Well, we wouldn't want that." Kurama casts him a look from under the fall of his hair, then very deliberately eases Kakashi's underwear down. He leans in, letting his breath ghost over sensitive skin, and makes sure his hair brushes Kakashi's cock as dips his head to press a teasing kiss to Kakashi's groin. "You're terrible," Kakashi laments, letting his head fall back against the pillows as he groans. Kurama laughs, cupping Kakashi's balls in one gentle hand to feel the weight of them and admiring the way it makes Kakashi jerk, breath stuttering. "Isn't there something you're supposed to be doing?" he says pointedly, and rubs the tip of his finger down the perineum. Kakashi cries out at that, knees locking tight around Kurama's shoulders, and he uses his grip on Kurama's hair to tug him back. Pushing himself up, he leans down to kiss Kurama hard and orders, "Get undressed." For a moment, Kurama considers feeling miffed at being denied the opportunity to play, but Kakashi is fumbling for something in the crack between the mattress and the headboard, and Kurama decides he'll get as much opportunity as he wants in the future. Right now, he wants to fuck Kakashi too badly. Next time, he promises, sliding to his feet beside the bed, "I'm going to blow you so hard you black out when you come." The sound that tears from Kakashi's throat is high and sharp and desperate, and he yanks his vest off, drags his shirt up and tosses it to the side. His gloves follow it a moment later, then his retaliate, and the snap of a tube opening sounds sharp against the tension. Kurama muffles a curse, stripping off the remains of his old shirt, and he can feel Kakashi's eyes for him as he undoes his pants and lets them fall. When he glances up, Kakashi is staring, pupils blown wide, an expression all the compliment Kurama needs. He puts a sway in his step as he moves back towards the bed, gets a knee on the mattress and crawls forward, getting his hands on Kakashi's thighs. He pushes them up and apart, presses his mouth to pale skin and scrapes his teeth over it. Kakashi's moan is deeply satisfying, as is his sudden fumble with the lube, but he squeezes it out over his fingers even as he shifts. Kurama lets him roll them, keeps his grip on muscular thighs as he's suddenly pinned to the bed, Kakashi straddling his chest. That tempting cock bobs in Kurama's face, and he doesn't even try to resist the urge to reach out, cupboard in his hand as he leans forward to drag his tongue up the soft skin. Kakashi gasps, hips bucking, and grabs Kurama's hair even as he reaches behind himself with his slicked hand. There's too many things to pay attention to, Kurama thinks, a little irritated, because he wants to watch Kakashi finger himself, wants to see him opening himself up, but he also doesn't want to take his mouth off of Kakashi. Each noise he wrings out of the man is perfect, makes the arousal tighter, hotter in his gut, and he closes his mouth over the tip, turns the head and feels a yank at his hair that doesn't quite hurt but urges him on. There's movement over his head, Kakashi adding more lube before he reaches back again, and Kurama can feel the buck of his hips as he adds another finger. With a satisfied hum that makes Kakashi cry out, Kurama seals his mouth over him again, slides his tongue over veins and delicate skin and relishes the shaky gasps above him. He tugs lightly on Kakashi's thighs, because like this he can't control much of the depth, and there's a curse before Kakashi grips his hair tighter, rocks forward into Kurama's mouth and then back onto his own fingers, and the strangled cry makes Kurama moan. He's achingly hard, with no way to get friction, but he arches up anyway, feels Kakashi's cock slip deeper, and tastes bitterness on his tongue. With a gasp, Kakashi pulls back, chest heaving, eyes on the verge of wild. He slides down Kurama's chest, throws himself into a kiss the moment the angle is even vaguely close to right, and it's all teeth and want, hot enough to make Kurama whine deep in his throat. Up, Kakashi urges breathlessly, and he's the most gorgeous thing Kurama's ever seen, hair falling around his face and his eyes hot dark. He kisses Kurama again, mouth slack, messy and urgent, and then slides away, catching Kurama's elbow and urging him along. Kurama moves with him, rolling up onto his knees and leaning over Kakashi as he sprawls on his back. A leg hooks around the backs of his thighs, pulling him in, and Kakashi chuckles, low and warm. "I'd ask if you're still going to respect me in the morning," he drawls, "but seeing as between the two of us I'm not the one who slept with Mamucha Zabuza." Kurama rolls his eyes pointedly, planting his hands alongside Kakashi's ribs and scraping his teeth lightly over a nipple. It makes Kakashi groan, makes his hand tighten on Kurama's hips, and Kurama hums in victory. "I can't still respect you when I never respected you in the first place," he retorts, only to lose his next words on a stuttering gasp when a slick hand wraps around his cock. The touch drags a whine from his throat, makes his head fall forward as he tries hard not to buck into Kakashi's hand. "Lies," Kakashi says cheerfully, and is deliberately, agonizingly thorough as he strokes every inch of Kurama's cock, watching with hooded eyes and a wicked smile as Kurama's muscles tremble. "If you didn't respect me, you would have killed me the first time we met." Kakashi, Kurama bites out, unable to focus on the teasing, only on the one that's beating a tattoo through his veins. With a soothing hum, Kakashi tugs him forward, uses the hand on his cock to line him up. "Come on," he murmurs, kissing the shell of Kurama's ear and using his free hand to brush crimson strands back from his face. Kurama groans, pressing forward, and it's slick and hot and tight, scatters every last thought beyond that breathless heat as he sinks in, Kakashi's body opening around him. It's so good, every nerve singing, every muscle pulled tense in a way that has nothing to do with violence and everything to do with giving in. There's a quiet, breathless noise from beneath him, Kakashi's body arching up into his, and Kurama grits his teeth and forces himself to stop, biting back a whimper. Instinct wants him to shove forward into that heat, to fuck and overwhelm and kiss Kakashi until they are both dizzy with it. But Kakashi trusts him, and the last thing Kurama wants is to hurt Kakashi, so he makes himself pause, raises his head to see Kakashi with his head thrown back, expression tight. "Kaka," he breaks off, grits his teeth and whines, sliding forward another inch as he tries to brace himself, and Kakashi groans. The leg around his thighs pulls tight, and Kakashi presses back, a clear enough sign. With a sound of relief, Kurama presses in, bottoms out with a bitten-off cry and pauses there, checking Kakashi's face for pain. "Kurama," Kakashi says, strained and rough and strangled. "I'm about to flip us over and do all the work myself. Please." His first thrust rings a gasp from Kakashi, and the second a rough moan. Legs hook tied around his hips as Kurama slides in, pulls back, and each movement wins the desire tighter, builds the hate. He gasps out a fractured version of Kakashi's name, finds Kakashi's mouth and slants a messy, graceless kiss over his lips. Kakashi's body clamps down around him, blindingly tight, and Kurama hisses, feels fingers in his hair and gets a hand on Kakashi's hip, hitching his body up. Another thrust rings a cry from Kakashi's throat, makes him shudder, and his hands go tight, dragging Kurama's head down. More than willing to comply, Kurama nips at his throat, kisses his jaw, feels the mind-numbing surge of pleasure washing over him. He tries to gasp out a warning, tangled around Kakashi's name, and Kakashi presses an open-mouthed kiss to his temple. Again, Kakashi groans, and Kurama shifts forward, pulls up. He is the cry that says that's the right angle. Kakashi's body clenches around him, painfully tight, and Kurama can't hold back anymore. 3 hard thrusts and he's coming, a breathless cry that might be the beginning of Kakashi's name torn from him. He slumps, head spinning, feels Kakashi's cock caught hard between their bodies, and pulls back as carefully as watery muscles will allow. Kakashi rolls with him, sprawls over him and kisses him deep and hard, and Kurama kisses back as best he can, uncoordinated and hazy. "Can I?" Kakashi asks against his lips, hips jerking, and he sounds wrecked, wild. It's too soon for much, but that tone sparks through Kurama's blood, makes him whine against Kakashi's mouth, and he rolls over onto his stomach, spreading his legs. Kakashi slides between them, breaths loud in the still air, and he kisses down Kurama's spine as he finds the lube again, fumbles it open, and then 2 fingers are sliding into Kurama's hole, pushing slick into him, pulling back so Kakashi can add more. It's wet and feels strange, but tingles across overwrought nerves and forces a sound from Kurama's throat. He doesn't know whether to push back into it or pull away, except and there's another finger, more stretch, I know, that makes the sensation sharper. Kurama shivers and groans, spreads his legs as sharp teeth skim his spine, and he twitches, instinct screaming predator even as he thrusts back, pushes into the weight of Kakashi's body on top of him. Perfect, Kakashi breathes in his ear, sprawling over Kurama's back with a hand on his hip to keep him still. His other hand pushes forward, drags a low, needy sound from Kurama's throat as the fingers spread wide, and then they're gone. An instant later Kakashi is pushing into him, thick and heavy, and it feels like he's dragging over every single nerve in Kurama's body, pleasure on the very edge of pain. He gasps, curls his hands in the sheets as Kakashi curses, breathless. There's a hand on his back, splayed across his spine as Kakashi pushes up, pushes all the way in one smooth slide until his hips are flush against Kurama's ass. He's so hard, the press of him making Kurama shiver, and it feels like an invasion, but it's so good he can't bring himself to care. There's only the stretch, the sparks across his nose that light up each shift of Kakashi's body, the weight on top of him. Kakashi gives it 1 more second before he pulls out, slow and careful, and then slants forward with a snap of his hips. Kurama snarls, jerking, pushes back because that was everything he needed and he wants more, and Kakashi gives it to him, braces his knees against the slippery sheets and fucks him hard, one hand pressing Kurama down, the other locked around his side. Each thrust shudders up Kurama's spine, makes spots of color swim behind his eyes. He rocks back as best he can, and he can feel the coiled tension in Kakashi, the desperate way he's chasing his orgasm, each snap of his hips enough to slam him home. There's a low ache building, but it makes the pleasure sweeter, makes Kurama gasp and fight the weight on him and push back for more. Kakashi growls, low and sharp, and his hand slips off Kurama's sweat-slick skin. He pitches forward, and inside of Kurama his cock shifts, drives home deeper, and Kurama shouts. Kakashi's chest is against his back, pressing him into the sheets, and Kurama isn't hard but that almost makes it better, lets him focus everything on way Kakashi is fucking him. A mouth on his neck, a ragged sound against his skin, and then teeth, sharp canines biting down. Kakashi slams into him, shudders and gasps and goes still, and Kurama shivers as aftershocks of pleasure slide up his body. The panting breaths against his shoulder turn to a kiss. Sloppy and tired, and Kakashi strokes his hips with long, slow sweeps, in no hurry to pull out. "You okay?" he asks roughly. Millimeter, Kurama shifts a little, more to feel Kakashi inside of him than any sort of impatience. He's suffering, but the weight of him is still strange, still good. Fuck, we are definitely doing that again. Kakashi chuckles, and his grip is something close to possessive as he presses kisses across Kurama's shoulder blades and then down his spine. "No argument from me," he murmurs. After another long moment, he groans and pulls out, flopping down next to Kurama and tugging pointedly at his arm. Without complaint, Kurama goes, curling up against his chest and letting his head rest on Kakashi's collarbone. Fingers trail through Kurama's hair, soft and soothing, and Kurama hums. I really don't hate you right now, he says into Kakashi's chest and feels him chuckle. Good, Kakashi tells him. Because I don't hate you, either. Kurama hums again, entirely pleased with that knowledge, and lets his eyes drift closed. He's rather less pleased when 4 Jinchuriki kids, 5 shinobi children, Risha and Higura storm the bedroom several hours later, shouting about rescuing red-haired princesses and defeating evil porn-reading dragons. Kakashi groans very loudly and drags a pillow over his head, while Kurama mutters vicious curses at the ceiling and gives Rishi a glare that gestures him to tug on the sheet his hand is inching towards. Kurama, we are here to rescue you. Naruto cheers, clambering up onto the bed, and Kurama groans and catches him as he starts to slip, dragging him into his lap. Yeah, kid, he sighs and buries his face in sun-gold hair to hide his smile. I noticed. Somewhere, he's absolutely certain his Naruto is laughing.